time leaves behind more than static relics. It preserves anomalies that defy our most sophisticated frameworks. Across continents, meticulous records and physical artifacts document events that quietly disrupt established timelines, standing as silent contradictions to accepted knowledge. These isolated fragments demand rigorous scrutiny rather than dismissive silence. Settle in as we examine the physical evidence, the unanswered clues, and the events that continue to challenge historians today. Carved into a limestone bench within a modest stone structure in southeastern Turkey, the Sayburç Reliefs emerge quietly from the landscape, almost as though they had been waiting for thousands of years to be noticed once again. The village of Sayburç rests not far from the famous ceremonial complexes of the Upper Mesopotamian region, an area often described as one of the earliest centers of settled human life. At first glance, the carvings appear deceptively simple. Yet, the longer they are observed, the more they seem to resist easy explanation. Figures of humans and powerful animals share the same surface, frozen in carefully arranged poses that still command attention after nearly 11,000 years. The reliefs came to wider scholarly attention during archaeological excavations in recent years, revealing what appears to have been a communal building dating to the pre-pottery Neolithic period, around 9000 BC. This was a time when agriculture was only beginning to transform human society. Permanent villages were emerging, yet pottery had not yet become common. Communities were experimenting with entirely new ways of living together, developing architecture, rituals, and social structures unlike anything that had existed before. Inside this building, the limestone bench was more than a place to sit. Its carefully carved imagery suggests that it served a symbolic purpose. One relief portrays a seated human figure facing what appears to be a leopard or another large predator. Nearby, another human figure stands beside a bull, gripping what many researchers interpret as a snake. Every detail appears intentional. The expressions, body positions, and relationships between the figures hint at a carefully constructed narrative whose meaning has long since faded from memory. Unlike later civilizations that left written records, the people who carved these reliefs left no alphabet, no inscriptions, and no historical chronicles explaining their intentions. Modern archaeology must therefore rely entirely upon context, comparison, and careful interpretation. Every conclusion remains provisional, shaped by evidence but limited by silence. Many archaeologists see the carvings as reflections of ritual life during the Neolithic transition. Dangerous animals such as leopards, bulls, and snakes likely carried symbolic importance, representing forces of nature that early farming communities both feared and respected. Human figures interacting directly with these creatures may symbolize authority, spiritual mediation, or ceremonial roles within the community. The communal building itself could have served as a gathering place where stories, rituals, or seasonal ceremonies reinforced shared beliefs. Yet several aspects remain unusually difficult to interpret. The proportions of the figures differ noticeably. Some animals appear larger than expected, while certain human features receive exaggerated emphasis. Rather than depicting everyday scenes, the artist may have intended to communicate concepts rather than literal events. But what concepts? Power? Fertility? Protection? Memory? The stone offers no explanation. The Sayburç reliefs have inevitably drawn comparisons with nearby monumental sites, particularly Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. Across this wider region, remarkably sophisticated stone carvings appeared long before cities, kingdoms, or organized states. Monumental architecture emerged among communities that were still transitioning from hunting and gathering toward agriculture. This sequence challenges older assumptions about how complex societies developed. For generations, historians believed that large monuments required advanced political systems and established civilizations. Sites like Sayburç suggest that symbolic thought, collective identity, and organized construction may have emerged much earlier than previously imagined. Some researchers propose that these settlements formed part of a broader cultural network, sharing artistic traditions and religious practices across Upper Mesopotamia. Rather than isolated villages, they may have maintained regular contact, exchanging ideas, techniques, and beliefs over considerable distances. The recurring appearance of similar animal imagery across multiple archaeological sites strengthens this possibility. Other interpretations extend further into speculation. A few independent researchers suggest the reliefs preserve fragments of ancient myths that disappeared long before written mythology emerged in Mesopotamia. According to this view, the carved figures may represent legendary heroes, creation narratives, or symbolic conflicts passed through countless generations of oral tradition before eventually being forgotten. Since oral traditions can survive for centuries, some wonder whether these carvings capture stories that later evolved into myths recorded thousands of years afterward. Others focus on the building itself. Why decorate a stone bench with such elaborate imagery unless the structure held exceptional significance? Was it reserved for respected elders, ritual specialists, or community leaders? Did ceremonies unfold before these carvings, with participants fully understanding symbols that are now impossible to decipher? Or did the images serve as visual reminders of beliefs shared by everyone who entered the room? Even the artistic style continues to provoke discussion. The figures possess a confidence and sophistication that seem remarkable for such an early period. Muscles, posture, movement, and spatial relationships reveal deliberate planning rather than experimental craftsmanship. They reflect artists already working within an established visual tradition, implying that earlier forms of symbolic art may still await discovery elsewhere beneath the soil. Each excavation season adds another fragment to the wider picture of humanity's earliest settled communities. Yet, the central meaning of the Sayburç reliefs remains beyond complete understanding. They continue to stand as silent witnesses from a world without written history, inviting careful observation while withholding certainty. Perhaps future discoveries will provide the missing context, or perhaps these carvings will always preserve part of their original purpose, leaving us to consider how much of humanity's earliest symbolic world still lies beyond our reach. Yet while some enigmas emerge from the earliest chapters of human settlement, others wait beneath the streets of places that have been continuously inhabited for centuries. In these later landscapes, history does not simply accumulate, it overlaps. Every generation leaves its mark above the last, until a chance discovery peels back the surface and exposes a chapter no one expected to find. Few discoveries illustrate this more vividly than Royston Cave. Tucked beneath the market town of Royston in Hertfordshire, England, the cave lies directly below what was once a busy medieval crossroads. Above ground, modern traffic passes through streets lined with shops and historic buildings. Few visitors would suspect that only a short distance below their feet sits a carefully carved chamber unlike any other in Britain. Reached by a narrow vertical shaft, the cave opens into a bell-shaped room cut directly into the soft chalk. Measuring roughly 8 meters from floor to ceiling, its curved walls are covered with an extraordinary collection of carvings that have puzzled historians for nearly 3 centuries. The chamber first came to light in 1742, during routine construction work. Laborers removing part of the market floor uncovered what appeared to be the top of a hidden shaft. Curious enough to investigate, they descended into darkness and entered a chamber that seemed untouched by daylight for generations. Layers of compacted earth had filled much of the interior, preserving its walls while concealing its original floor. As the debris was cleared, intricate carvings gradually emerged from the chalk, transforming what initially appeared to be an ordinary underground cavity into one of England's most enduring historical puzzles. Unlike natural caves formed by geological processes, Royston Cave was deliberately excavated. Every curve of its walls appears intentional. The dome-like ceiling, the central shaft, and the carefully shaped interior suggest skilled workmanship. Yet no contemporary document records who created it, when it was completed, or why it was hidden beneath the crossroads. The carvings themselves deepen the mystery. Saints, crosses, human figures, animals, swords, and religious symbols cover much of the chamber's surface. Among the most recognizable are depictions commonly identified as Saint Catherine holding her wheel, Saint Christopher carrying the Christ child, and figures believed to represent medieval pilgrims or monks. Other carvings are far less certain. Some have weathered with time, while others overlap one another, making interpretation difficult. Together, they create the impression of a sacred space, but one whose precise function remains frustratingly elusive. Most historians agree that many of the carvings likely date to the medieval period, perhaps between the 13th and 14th centuries. This dating aligns with the artistic style of several figures and with Royston's historical importance as a crossroads where major routes converged. Pilgrims, merchants, clergy, and travelers regularly pass through the town, making it a natural location for religious activity. One of the earliest and most persistent theories connects the cave with the Knights Templar. During the 12th and 13th centuries, the Templars established properties throughout England and became one of medieval Europe's most influential military and religious orders. Their dramatic suppression in the early 14th century gave rise to countless legends involving concealed treasures, secret ceremonies, and hidden sanctuaries. Because Royston contained land associated with the Templars, some have suggested that the cave served as a private chapel or meeting place for members of the order. At first glance, the theory seems attractive. Certain carvings possess unmistakably Christian symbolism, while the chamber's concealed entrance appears consistent with the idea of a secluded devotional space. Yet, the evidence remains incomplete. No surviving medieval records link the cave directly to the Knights Templar, and no artifacts discovered inside have definitively confirmed their presence. Most professional historians therefore regard the connection as intriguing but unproven. Other explanations remain firmly within conventional archaeology. Some researchers argue that the chamber may have functioned as a hermitage, occupied by a religious recluse devoted to prayer and contemplation. Medieval England included numerous anchorites and hermits who voluntarily withdrew from ordinary society while remaining close to nearby communities. The enclosed design of Royston Cave could certainly support such an interpretation, offering both isolation and symbolic separation from the world above. Another possibility is that the chamber served as a small private chapel connected to pilgrims traveling through the region. The abundance of religious imagery and the central location beneath an important crossroads could support this view. Perhaps worshippers descended into the cave for ceremonies, prayer, or reflection before continuing their journeys. If so, why was its entrance later concealed and eventually forgotten? The cave's architecture introduces further questions. The vertical shaft leading downward appears unusually narrow, creating a controlled point of entry. Was this simply a practical design, or did descending into the chamber hold symbolic significance? Throughout medieval Christianity, movement underground often carried associations with humility, burial, reflection, and spiritual rebirth. Entering Royston Cave may have been intended as more than a physical journey. It could have represented a ritual passage into a sacred environment deliberately separated from ordinary life. Not every theory remains rooted in medieval history. Over the centuries, more speculative interpretations have emerged. Some writers have proposed that the cave predates the Middle Ages entirely, suggesting it originated during the Roman occupation of Britain, or even earlier. According to these ideas, medieval worshippers may simply have reused a much older underground chamber whose original purpose had already been forgotten. Others point to the unusual arrangement of the carvings, wondering whether they encode messages rather than merely decorate the walls. Could certain figures represent symbolic sequences understood only by a select community? Are some carvings intentionally positioned to correspond with astronomical events or seasonal light entering through the shaft above? Detailed surveys have produced interesting observations, but none have yielded broad scholarly agreement. The chamber's worn surfaces add another layer of uncertainty. Some carvings remain remarkably clear, while others have faded almost beyond recognition. This uneven preservation complicates efforts to establish a reliable sequence of construction. Were all the carvings completed during a single period, or did generations of visitors gradually add their own images over centuries? Every new analysis reveals subtle details while simultaneously raising fresh uncertainties. Even the discovery itself leaves unanswered questions. If the cave served an important religious purpose, why did knowledge of its location disappear so completely? Medieval communities typically preserved information about churches, shrines, and sacred spaces. The fact that laborers stumbled upon the shaft by accident in 1742 suggests that whatever tradition once surrounded the chamber had long since vanished from local memory. Modern technologies, including three-dimensional scanning and detailed archaeological recording, have documented the cave with remarkable precision. These methods continue to reveal faint carvings and structural features previously overlooked. Yet, despite increasingly sophisticated analysis, no single explanation has managed to account for every aspect of the chamber: its architecture, its artwork, its location, and its disappearance from history. Perhaps Royston Cave reflects nothing more than the quiet devotion of medieval worshippers whose names have been lost with time. Or perhaps it represents a chapter of English history that survives only in fragments, its original purpose obscured by centuries of changing landscapes and fading memory. Standing within its chalk walls today, surrounded by figures carved by hands long gone, one is left with the same lingering uncertainty that has endured since the chamber first returned to daylight. Some places preserve their stories in written records. Others preserve only the echoes, inviting each generation to decide how much can truly be understood and how much may still remain concealed. And just as underground chambers can preserve unanswered chapters of the medieval world, remarkable objects sometimes carry mysteries no less profound. Removed from the earth after thousands of years of silence, they arrive without written histories, without names, and without voices to explain why they were created. Few discoveries illustrate this more vividly than the extraordinary artifact known as the Mould Gold Cape. The rolling hills of northeastern Wales appear peaceful today, shaped by farmland, forests, and quiet villages. Yet, beneath this landscape lies evidence of communities that flourished more than 3,000 years ago during Britain's Bronze Age. In 1833, laborers quarrying gravel near the town of Mould uncovered what seemed at first to be fragments of crushed metal mixed with the remains of an ancient burial. The discovery was accidental, and unfortunately, much of the archaeological context was disturbed before scholars could properly investigate the site. By the time experts arrived, invaluable information had already disappeared forever. What survived, however, was extraordinary. Carefully reconstructed from hundreds of flattened fragments, the object became known as the Mould Gold Cape. Fashioned from a single sheet of remarkably thin gold, the cape is unlike almost anything else discovered from Bronze Age Europe. Rather than hanging loosely like a cloak, it was shaped to fit tightly over the shoulders, upper chest, and back, forming an elegant yet highly restrictive garment. Its surface is covered with rows of precisely embossed ridges, bosses, and delicate geometric patterns that shimmer whenever light strikes the metal. Even after more than 3,000 years, its craftsmanship remains astonishing. The cape dates to approximately 1900 to 1600 BC, a period when metallurgy was advancing rapidly across Europe. Goldsmiths had already mastered techniques requiring remarkable precision, but the mold gold cape represents an exceptional level of artistic and technical ability. Hammering a single sheet of gold into such a complex form demanded extraordinary skill. Every strike had to be carefully controlled. Too much force could split the fragile metal. Too little would fail to achieve the desired shape. The finished object demonstrates not only technical expertise but also careful planning from beginning to end. The gold itself was likely obtained from local Welsh sources, where rivers and mountains have yielded precious metals since prehistoric times. Scientific analysis suggests that ancient craftspeople deliberately selected exceptionally pure material before shaping it into one of Europe's most celebrated Bronze Age treasures. Yet, admiration for its craftsmanship quickly leads to deeper questions. Who wore such an object? The cape's design severely limited movement. Its high collar restricted the neck, while its narrow shoulders prevented the wearer from raising their arms very far. Walking was possible, but only with deliberate care. Any demanding physical activity would have been nearly impossible. This immediately suggests that the cape was never intended for ordinary life. Most archaeologists believe it functioned as ceremonial regalia, worn during important rituals or public gatherings. Rather than emphasizing practicality, its purpose may have been symbolic. The brilliant surface would have reflected sunlight, firelight, or torchlight with dazzling intensity, transforming the wearer into a striking visual presence before assembled communities. But who deserved such distinction? The burial itself contained only limited human remains, making identification difficult. Some scholars propose the cape belonged to a powerful political leader whose authority extended across surrounding communities. Others suggest it adorned a high-ranking religious figure responsible for conducting ceremonies connected to seasonal cycles, agriculture, or ancestral traditions. Another possibility is that these roles were never separate at all. In many prehistoric societies, leadership and spiritual authority often overlapped. A respected individual may have served simultaneously as community leader, ritual specialist, mediator, and guardian of tradition. If so, the cape could have represented not personal wealth alone, but the visible expression of collective identity and sacred responsibility. Its decoration continues to attract careful study. The repeated geometric motifs appear highly organized rather than merely decorative. Rows of concentric forms, raised ridges, and carefully spaced bosses create rhythms that almost resemble visual language. Some researchers believe these patterns simply reflect Bronze Age artistic preferences shared across northwestern Europe. Others wonder whether the arrangement carried symbolic meaning now beyond recovery. Could the repeated designs represent cycles observed in nature? The movement of the sun, agricultural seasons, social rank, family identity. Without written records, certainty remains impossible. The cape also raises intriguing questions about Bronze Age craftsmanship itself. Producing such an object required specialized knowledge, refined tools, and access to valuable raw materials. This suggests that communities in prehistoric Wales possessed skilled artisans capable of undertaking highly sophisticated projects. Were these goldsmiths attached to elite households? Did they travel between settlements, sharing techniques across distant regions? Or were they members of traditions passed carefully from one generation to the next, preserving methods through apprenticeship long before writing documented such knowledge? The Cape's similarities to other prestigious Bronze Age objects found throughout Britain, Ireland, and continental Europe hint at extensive networks of communication. Ideas, materials, and artistic styles appear to have traveled surprisingly long distances. Although separated by mountains, rivers, and seas, these communities were far from isolated. Still, not everyone interprets the Cape solely through conventional archaeology. Some independent researchers have suggested that its intricate geometry reflects astronomical symbolism, perhaps connected to observations of the heavens. According to this interpretation, the embossed patterns may represent celestial cycles important to Bronze Age ceremonial life. While no direct evidence confirms this theory, ancient societies throughout Europe clearly paid close attention to seasonal movements of the sun and stars, making the possibility difficult to dismiss entirely. Others focus on the object's remarkable craftsmanship itself. How could artisans working more than 3,000 years ago produce such delicate precision using relatively simple tools? Archaeologists have successfully recreated many Bronze Age techniques, demonstrating that such craftsmanship was entirely achievable with patience, skill, and experience. Yet, the Cape still inspires admiration, because it reveals just how advanced prehistoric metalworkers had already become. Rather than challenging established history, it expands appreciation for the ingenuity that flourished long before later civilizations dominated the historical record. There is also the enduring mystery of its burial. Why place an object of such extraordinary value inside a grave? Gold was rare, labor-intensive, and symbolically powerful. Recovering it after burial would have provided immense material wealth for future generations. Yet, someone deliberately chose to remove the Cape permanently from everyday use. Perhaps the burial itself formed part of a ceremony expressing beliefs about death and the journey beyond life. The Cape may have accompanied its owner as an offering, a mark of honor, or an essential symbol believed necessary for existence after death. Or perhaps the burial represented an act of sacrifice by an entire community, willingly surrendering one of its greatest treasures for reasons no longer preserved. Unfortunately, the hurried 19th century excavation destroyed much of the evidence that might have answered these questions. Objects associated with the burial were dispersed, damaged, or lost before modern archaeological methods existed. Every missing fragment leaves another gap in the story. Today, preserved with extraordinary care, the Mold Gold Cape remains one of the finest surviving masterpieces of Bronze Age Europe. Visitors often marvel first at its beauty, then at its astonishing age, before finally confronting the deeper uncertainty that surrounds it. It stands as both a triumph of human creativity and a reminder of how much has slipped beyond historical memory. The gold continues to gleam exactly as it did thousands of years ago, but the identity of the person who once wore it, and the beliefs that gave it meaning, remain just beyond our reach, waiting for evidence that may still lie undiscovered beneath the landscapes of the ancient world. As remarkable as a finely crafted ceremonial object can be, there are times when the greatest puzzles are not forged from precious metal, but carved into ordinary stone. Weathered surfaces, simple in appearance, can preserve symbols capable of challenging accepted narratives for generations. Among these enduring enigmas are a collection of carved artifacts known as the Newark Holy Stones, objects that have inspired debate since the moment they emerged from the soil. The landscape surrounding Newark, in the American state of Ohio, is rich with traces of prehistoric earthworks. Broad embankments, geometric enclosures, and ceremonial mounds still define portions of the countryside, reminders of the sophisticated Hopewell culture that flourished between roughly 100 BC and AD 500. Long before European settlers arrived, these monumental constructions reflected careful planning, advanced engineering, and complex ceremonial traditions. By the 19th century, however, many of these ancient sites had already been altered by farming, construction, and expanding towns. It was within this landscape, during the 1860s, that two unusual stone objects were reportedly discovered. The first artifact, now commonly called the Keystone, was found in 1860 during excavations associated with one of Newark's ancient earthworks. Fashioned from a dark stone and roughly wedge-shaped, it immediately attracted attention because of the symbols carved across its surface. Not long afterward, a second object, known as the Decalogue Stone, entered public awareness. Unlike the Keystone, this artifact featured multiple lines of carefully engraved Hebrew characters surrounding a central figure often identified as Moses. For many observers, the implications seemed extraordinary. If authentic and genuinely ancient, the inscriptions appeared to suggest contact between the ancient Near East and North America long before the voyages traditionally credited with connecting the two worlds. Such a possibility would fundamentally reshape accepted understandings of transoceanic travel and cultural exchange. Yet, from the beginning, uncertainty surrounded nearly every aspect of the discovery. The archaeological documentation was incomplete by modern standards. Excavation methods during the 19th century often lacked the careful recording now considered essential. Exact positions, soil layers, and surrounding materials were not always documented with sufficient precision. As a result, many of the contextual details that archaeologists rely upon today were either never recorded or were later disputed. The inscriptions themselves became the focus of immediate scholarly attention. Experts in ancient Hebrew recognized that the Decalogue Stone appeared to contain portions of the Ten Commandments written in a form resembling square Hebrew script. The central figure, interpreted as Moses, held tablets bearing abbreviated commandments. Other carvings seemed to reinforce recognizable themes from Jewish religious tradition. This immediately raised an important question. How could inscriptions associated with ancient Hebrew tradition appear within prehistoric earthworks built by Native American societies whose cultural histories developed independently? Several explanations emerged, each attempting to account for the unusual artifacts. The most widely accepted interpretation among professional archaeologists identifies the Newark holy stones as 19th-century creations, rather than genuine prehistoric objects. According to this view, the stones were likely carved relatively close to the time of their discovery, either as deliberate hoaxes or perhaps as misunderstood devotional objects that somehow entered the excavation sites. Supporters of this conclusion point to several observations. The style of the Hebrew script appears more consistent with forms familiar to scholars during the 19th century than with inscriptions dating to the First Temple period. Certain linguistic features also raise questions regarding authenticity. Additionally, the absence of comparable Hebrew inscriptions anywhere else within securely excavated Native American archaeological sites makes the Newark stones appear highly isolated. From a scientific perspective, isolated discoveries that lack supporting evidence naturally invite careful skepticism. Yet the story does not end there. Some researchers have argued that laboratory analysis conducted during the 20th century detected signs of considerable age on portions of the carvings. Microscopic examinations have been interpreted in different ways, with some investigators suggesting that weathering inside the engraved lines could indicate significant antiquity. Others counter that such evidence remains inconclusive, particularly because the stone's documented history before entering museum collections contains numerous uncertainties. The debate therefore shifted from the inscriptions themselves to the evidence surrounding them. Could 19th century tools have produced the carvings? Were the stones intentionally buried? Might they have been introduced into the excavation area after the original earthworks were constructed? Or do gaps in the historical record simply prevent modern investigators from reaching a definitive conclusion? Another layer of intrigue involves the broader cultural environment of 19th century America. Interest in biblical archaeology was growing rapidly during this period. Ancient languages fascinated scholars, collectors, and amateur historians alike. Public enthusiasm for discoveries linking biblical narratives to newly explored lands created fertile ground for both sincere misunderstandings and intentional fabrications. Throughout the century, numerous disputed artifacts emerged claiming unexpected connections between the Old World and the Americas. Within this historical context, many historians regard the Newark holy stones as products of their own era rather than of antiquity. Still, not every observer accepts that conclusion without reservation. A small number of independent researchers continue to argue that the stones deserve renewed examination using the latest analytical techniques. Advances in microscopic imaging, geochemical analysis, and three-dimensional surface mapping now allow investigators to study engraved objects with extraordinary precision. Supporters of further testing suggest that modern technology could provide clearer answers than were possible during earlier investigations. Others take a broader perspective. Even if the stones ultimately prove to be 19th century creations, they remain historically significant. They reveal how archaeology, religion, and national identity intersected during a period when many people sought tangible evidence connecting biblical history with the American landscape. In that sense, the Newark Holy Stones document not only debates about the distant past, but also the intellectual climate of the society that first encountered them. There are also questions surrounding the individuals involved in their discovery. Were those who uncovered the stones genuinely convinced they had found remarkable relics? Did someone intentionally place them within the earthworks? If deception occurred, was it carefully planned or simply opportunistic? Unfortunately, surviving records provide only fragments of these personal stories, leaving motivations largely beyond reconstruction. The nearby Newark Earthworks themselves continue to command respect as one of North America's greatest archaeological achievements. Built with astonishing precision centuries before European arrival, they demonstrate advanced understanding of geometry, astronomy, and ceremonial planning. Their importance stands independently of the disputed stones discovered in their vicinity. Yet, because the artifacts became associated with these monumental constructions, their controversy inevitably became intertwined with one of America's most significant prehistoric landscapes. Today, the Newark Holy Stones occupy an unusual position within historical research. They are neither universally accepted nor entirely forgotten. Instead, they remain suspended between competing interpretations, examined repeatedly by scholars, collectors, and curious visitors searching for clarity in evidence that refuses to settle comfortably into a single explanation. Perhaps future scientific analysis will finally resolve the questions surrounding their origin. Or perhaps the greatest lesson lies not in proving one theory over another, but in recognizing how easily fragments of the past can become entangled with the hopes, beliefs, and assumptions of those who seek to interpret them. Until clearer evidence emerges, the carved symbols continue to invite careful examination, leaving one lingering thought behind. Are they remnants of an overlooked chapter in history, or enduring reminders that the search for certainty is often as complex as the past itself? Yet history is not shaped only by disputed inscriptions or ceremonial treasures. Sometimes an entire settlement raises questions that no single artifact can answer. A village may leave behind houses, tools, graves, and works of art, yet still withhold the beliefs, customs, and motivations of the people who once called it home. High in the Kashmir Valley, one archaeological site continues to offer precisely that kind of enduring puzzle. Its name is Burzahom. Resting on a quiet plateau overlooking the broad Kashmir Valley in northern India, Burzahom appears almost unremarkable from the surface. Gentle fields stretch toward distant mountains, whose snow-covered peaks dominate the horizon for much of the year. The climate changes dramatically with the seasons, bringing cold winters and mild summers. It is a landscape that has sustained human communities for thousands of years, nourished by fertile soil, freshwater lakes, and abundant wildlife. Beneath this peaceful setting, however, archaeologists uncovered evidence of one of South Asia's most fascinating prehistoric settlements. Excavations carried out during the 20th century revealed that Burzahom was occupied from roughly 3000 BC through several later cultural phases. The settlement belongs primarily to the Neolithic period, when communities throughout many parts of the world were gradually transitioning from hunting and gathering toward agriculture and permanent habitation. Yet Burzahom does not simply resemble other Neolithic villages. It displays architectural choices, burial customs, and artistic expressions that remain strikingly distinctive even today. Among its most recognizable features are the deep pit dwellings. Rather than constructing houses entirely above ground, the earliest inhabitants dug large circular or oval pits directly into the earth. Some extended several meters below the surface, with carefully shaped walls accessed by ladders or steps. Wooden posts likely supported roofs built over these excavated chambers, creating insulated living spaces protected from harsh winter temperatures. At first glance, the design appears practical. Underground homes provide natural protection from cold winds while maintaining relatively stable interior temperatures throughout the year. Similar forms of architecture have appeared independently in several regions with demanding climates, yet questions remain. Why did later generations gradually abandon these pit houses in favor of structures built above ground? Was the change driven by climate, evolving technology, shifting social organization, or changing beliefs about domestic life? The archaeological layers preserve evidence of this transition, but they do not explain the decisions that shaped it. Daily life at Burzahom appears surprisingly complex. Stone tools, polished axes, bone implements, pottery, and evidence of cultivated crops reveal a community that combined farming with hunting and fishing. Animal bones recovered during excavations include deer, sheep, goats, cattle, wolves, and dogs, illustrating an economy adapted to diverse environmental conditions. The inhabitants clearly possess detailed knowledge of their landscape and developed technology suited to its opportunities and challenges. Yet it is not the tools that have drawn the greatest attention. It is the burials. Throughout the settlement, archaeologists discovered graves located remarkably close to residential areas. In some cases, individuals were buried beneath or beside houses where families had lived for generations. Such practices are not entirely unique in prehistoric archaeology, but Burzahom presents additional details that continue to invite discussion. Several human burials contained carefully arranged animal remains, particularly dogs. In some graves, dogs appear to have been buried alongside humans with deliberate care rather than discarded casually. Elsewhere, complete animal burials occurred independently, suggesting that certain species possessed social or symbolic importance extending beyond simple economic value. What relationship existed between these people and their animals? Were dogs regarded merely as hunting companions, or did they occupy a more profound place within community beliefs? Across many ancient cultures, animals served as spiritual guides, guardians, or companions believed to accompany individuals beyond death. While direct evidence for such beliefs at Burzahom remains unavailable, the careful treatment of animal burials naturally encourages thoughtful comparison. Another discovery has inspired even greater curiosity. One engraved stone slab recovered from the site depicts what appears to be a hunting scene. Human figures pursue animals beneath two circular objects suspended in the sky. Most archaeologists interpret these circles as the sun and the moon, a reasonable explanation consistent with prehistoric artistic traditions. Even so, alternative interpretations have emerged. Some observers have suggested the circles represent a rare astronomical event, perhaps a conjunction, eclipse, or other celestial phenomenon witnessed by the artist. Others propose they simply reflect symbolic elements incorporated into a narrative scene without intending literal astronomical accuracy. Because prehistoric artists left no written explanations, certainty remains elusive. The engraving itself is remarkably significant regardless of interpretation. It stands among the earliest known examples of narrative rock art from the region, demonstrating that the inhabitants of Burzahom sought not only to survive but also to record ideas visually. Whether depicting everyday hunting, ceremonial symbolism, or celestial observation, the image reflects a sophisticated capacity for storytelling through art. Connections beyond the Kashmir Valley have also attracted scholarly attention. Certain tools and cultural practices found at Burzahom resemble discoveries made across parts of Central Asia and northern China. These similarities have prompted discussions about prehistoric exchange networks extending far beyond local communities. Did people migrate into the valley carrying architectural traditions and technological knowledge? Were ideas transmitted gradually through generations of neighboring cultures? Or did separate communities independently develop comparable solutions to similar environmental challenges? Archaeologists continue comparing artifacts across vast regions, searching for patterns that might clarify these ancient relationships. The settlement also preserves evidence of long-term continuity. Rather than disappearing suddenly, Burzahom evolved over many centuries. Architectural forms changed, pottery styles developed, agricultural practices expanded. Metal objects eventually appeared during later occupation phases. The site records gradual adaptation rather than abrupt collapse, offering a rare opportunity to observe prehistoric society transforming across generations. Yet, despite this unusually rich archaeological record, the beliefs guiding these changes remain largely invisible. What ceremonies took place within the settlement? How did families understand birth, death, ancestry, or the changing seasons? What stories were told around evening fires as winter snow covered the valley outside? No written language survives to answer these questions. Naturally, this silence has encouraged broader speculation. Some independent researchers argue that Burzahom's unusual combination of pit dwellings, animal burials, and celestial imagery reflects a distinctive spiritual tradition unlike those documented elsewhere in South Asia. Others wonder whether the settlement preserves remnants of cultural influences that later disappeared entirely as new populations and belief systems spread across the region. These ideas remain difficult to evaluate because the available evidence allows multiple interpretations while conclusively supporting none of them. Modern archaeological science continues to add important details. Radiocarbon dating has refined the settlement's chronology. Microscopic analysis of plant remains has improved understanding of ancient agriculture. Studies of animal bones revealed changing patterns of domestication and hunting over time. Each discovery sharpens the picture of everyday life while leaving deeper questions unresolved. Standing today at Burzahom, it is easy to overlook the remarkable human story concealed beneath the ground. Beneath every layer of soil lies evidence of families adapting to changing climates, raising children, burying loved ones, caring for animals, and leaving behind works of art whose meanings remain only partially understood. Thousands of years have passed since voices last echoed through this settlement, yet its enduring mysteries continue to invite careful reflection. Perhaps future excavations will uncover new clues that illuminate the beliefs of its earliest inhabitants. Or perhaps Burzahom will always remind us that even the most thoroughly excavated places can preserve questions that no excavation alone can fully answer. And as settlements like Burzahom remind us, the landscape itself can preserve memories long after the people who shaped it have disappeared. Sometimes those memories survive not in houses or artifacts, but in the contours of the earth itself. A ring of banks and ditches, softened by centuries of wind and rain, can still hint at ceremonies, conflicts, and traditions whose meanings have slipped beyond the reach of written history. Such is the enduring presence of Wandlebury Ring. Perched on the rolling chalk hills of Cambridgeshire in eastern England, Wandlebury Ring overlooks a broad countryside that stretches toward the horizon in every direction. Today, the site rests within peaceful woodland, where birdsong echoes through ancient trees and winding footpaths invite quiet exploration. To a casual visitor, the circular earthworks appear as gentle rises and shallow depressions beneath the forest floor. Yet, these subtle features conceal one of Britain's most intriguing prehistoric monuments, a place that has attracted curiosity for centuries. At its heart lies a large circular enclosure surrounded by multiple defensive banks and ditches. Although weather and erosion have softened their original form, the scale of the construction remains impressive. The enclosure measures nearly 300 meters across, enclosing a substantial area that once required enormous labor to create. Long before metal machinery existed, countless individuals dug deep trenches with simple tools, piling vast quantities of chalk and soil into carefully shaped embankments. The effort alone suggests that Wandlebury held considerable importance. Most archaeologists identify the site as an Iron Age hill fort, constructed sometime between the 5th and 3rd centuries BC. During this period, communities throughout Britain increasingly built enclosed settlements that offered protection while also serving as centers of trade, leadership, and social organization. Wandlebury fits many characteristics of these fortified sites, yet several details distinguish it from more conventional examples. Unlike hill forts occupying steep mountain ridges, Wandlebury stands on relatively gentle terrain. Its elevated position offers broad views, but not the dramatic natural defenses found elsewhere. This raises an immediate question. Was defense truly its primary purpose? The multiple concentric ditches certainly appear formidable, suggesting careful planning against potential attack. Yet some researchers argue that the earthworks may have served symbolic as well as military functions. Monumental boundaries often communicate authority, marking spaces set apart from ordinary life. Entering through the carefully designed gateways may have carried social or ceremonial significance beyond simple protection. Excavations have revealed evidence of prolonged occupation. Pottery fragments, animal bones, metal objects, and structural remains indicate that people lived, worked, and gathered within the enclosure across extended periods. Daily activities unfolded alongside whatever larger purpose the monument served. Families likely prepared food, maintained buildings, cared for livestock, and conducted trade while surrounded by the imposing earthworks. Yet the site's story extends far beyond the Iron Age. Archaeological investigations suggest that the hill may have attracted human attention even earlier. Flint tools discovered nearby point to activity during prehistoric periods long before the construction of the enclosure itself. Like many elevated locations across Britain, the hill appears to have retained significance across successive generations, each leaving subtle traces while adapting the landscape to changing needs. Then came the Romans. Following the Roman conquest of Britain during the 1st century AD, many existing native settlements were transformed or abandoned. At Wandlebury, evidence suggests continued activity under Roman influence. A substantial Roman villa eventually occupied part of the enclosure, introducing a very different style of architecture and daily life. Stone buildings, tiled roofs, mosaics, and organized agriculture gradually reshaped portions of a landscape that had already witnessed centuries of earlier occupation. This remarkable continuity complicates interpretation. How much of the earlier monument remained meaningful to those who built the Roman villa? Did they recognize the site's older significance? Or did practical considerations alone determine its continued use? The archaeological record offers possibilities but few definitive answers. Over time, Wandlebury accumulated another layer of history, not through excavation, but through folklore. Local traditions surrounding the earthworks grew increasingly elaborate during the medieval and early modern periods. Among the most enduring legends is the tale of a magical spring said to flow within the enclosure. According to one version, if a traveler walked around the ring 7 times, a black knight would emerge to offer a drink from the spring. Accepting the invitation supposedly brought either extraordinary fortune or grave misfortune, depending on the version of the story. Like many traditional legends, the tale evolved over generations. No historical evidence connects the story directly to the Iron Age builders, yet its persistence is striking. Sacred springs, circular enclosures, and supernatural guardians appear repeatedly throughout British folklore. Whether these legends preserve distant echoes of ancient beliefs or simply reflect the imagination of later communities remains impossible to determine. The circular form of Wandlebury itself has inspired considerable reflection. Circles possess enduring symbolic importance across many cultures. They suggest continuity, cycles, protection, and cosmic order. Throughout prehistoric Britain, circular monuments, from henges to stone circles, often occupied prominent positions within ceremonial landscapes. Was Wandlebury conceived solely as a fortified settlement? Or might its circular plan have carried deeper symbolic meaning understood by those who first marked out its boundaries? Some archaeologists suggest that practical and symbolic purposes need not be separated. A place could simultaneously protect its inhabitants, reinforce social identity, and serve as a focal point for communal gatherings or seasonal ceremonies. Astronomical possibilities have occasionally entered the discussion as well. Several researchers have examined whether the entrances or earthworks align with significant solar events, such as the summer or winter solstice. While certain observations appear suggestive, no broad scholarly consensus has emerged. Unlike monuments specifically designed around clear celestial alignments, Wandlebury offers no unmistakable evidence that astronomical observation formed its primary function. Even so, the elevated position naturally provided expansive views of both landscape and sky. For communities whose lives depended upon seasonal cycles, careful observation of the heavens would have carried obvious practical value. Whether the enclosure itself reflected this knowledge remains an open question. More speculative theories have also found their place in discussions surrounding the site. Some writers propose that Wandlebury occupied an important ceremonial center long before the Iron Age, with successive generations rebuilding or expanding an already sacred location. Others point to the monument's layered history as evidence that particular landscapes can retain cultural importance across thousands of years, even as individual traditions evolve or disappear. Although such ideas remain difficult to verify, archaeology increasingly recognizes that many prehistoric monuments were reused repeatedly, rather than abandoned after a single phase of construction. Memory itself may have shaped decisions about where later communities chose to settle, worship, or build. Modern archaeological methods continue refining our understanding of Wandlebury. Geophysical surveys have revealed buried features invisible from the surface. Excavations have clarified construction phases, while environmental studies reconstruct ancient vegetation, climate, and patterns of land use. Each new investigation adds detail to the site's chronology, yet none fully explains why this particular hill inspired such sustained human attention over so many centuries. Standing within the quiet enclosure today, surrounded by trees that arrived long after its builders departed, it becomes surprisingly easy to lose any sense of time. The banks still trace their ancient circle. The ditches still define boundaries first cut by hands more than 2,000 years ago. Layers of occupation, legend, and interpretation overlap within the same landscape, each offering part of the story while leaving crucial pieces absent. Whether Wandlebury Ring began as a fortress, a ceremonial gathering place, a symbol of authority, or some combination of all three, its deepest purpose remains only partially illuminated. And perhaps somewhere beneath its weathered earth, beneath roots and chalk, and centuries of silence, there are still clues waiting patiently for the moment they return to the light. From prehistoric enclosures carved into the hills of Britain, our journey now moves to an entirely different landscape, one shaped not by chalk ridges and cool forests, but by vast deserts, seasonal rivers, and distant mountain ranges. Here, another archaeological mystery emerged almost by accident, challenging long-established assumptions about the origins of early civilization. At the center of that story stands a place known as Konar Sandal. The broad plain of the Halil River in southeastern Iran appears harsh for much of the year. Dry winds sweep across the landscape, while rugged mountains rise in the distance, creating a dramatic contrast between fertile riverbanks and surrounding desert. Today, small settlements and cultivated fields occupy parts of the valley, but thousands of years ago, this region supported a thriving population whose achievements remained almost entirely unknown until the beginning of the 21st century. For generations, the land concealed its past beneath layers of sand and soil. Then, following severe flooding in 2001, ancient graves and artifacts began to emerge from the earth. The discovery triggered widespread looting before archaeologists could secure the area. Hundreds of intricately carved objects entered the illegal antiquities market, stripped from their original context and scattered across private collections around the world. Although this loss represented a major setback for archaeology, it also drew international attention to a site that had scarcely been recognized before. Subsequent excavations revealed something remarkable. Rather than an isolated cemetery, the discoveries belonged to a large urban settlement centered around two substantial mounds now known as Konar Sandal North and Konar Sandal South. Together, they formed part of what appears to have been a major Bronze Age center, dating primarily between approximately 3000 and 2200 BC. The scale immediately surprised researchers. Massive mud brick architecture, carefully planned construction, workshops, administrative areas, and elaborate artifacts suggested a level of social organization previously unsuspected in this region. Far from being a remote outpost, Konar Sandal appeared connected to extensive trade networks linking Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, Central Asia, and the Persian Gulf. Its location was no accident. The Halil River Valley offered fertile agricultural land while serving as a natural corridor between distant civilizations. Traders could move raw materials, crafted goods, and ideas across enormous distances. Chlorite stone, copper, precious minerals, and finely worked luxury objects circulated through these networks, helping transform settlements like Konar Sandal into prosperous centers of production and exchange. Among the site's most striking discoveries are its beautifully carved chlorite vessels. Fashioned from dark green stone, these objects display extraordinary craftsmanship. Their surfaces are covered with finely engraved scenes depicting mountains, wild animals, composite creatures, serpents, architectural forms, and complex geometric designs. Some images appear familiar, echoing themes seen elsewhere throughout the ancient Near East. Others remain unique, resisting straightforward interpretation. The carvings invite careful attention. Certain vessels portray towering structures resembling stepped buildings. Others show eagles, bulls, snakes, or mythological beings interacting in carefully balanced compositions. Without accompanying written explanations, modern scholars can identify recurring motifs but cannot confidently reconstruct the beliefs or stories they originally illustrated. Were these ceremonial objects, luxury trade goods, symbols of political authority, perhaps all three at once? As excavations continued, another discovery intensified scholarly interest. Fragments of inscribed tablets were recovered from the site, bearing signs unlike the fully developed cuneiform writing of Mesopotamia. Some researchers suggested these markings represented an independent writing system developed locally during the Bronze Age. If correct, the implications would be profound. Writing has traditionally been associated with a relatively small number of early civilizations, particularly southern Mesopotamia and Egypt. Evidence for another independently developed script would significantly expand our understanding of how administrative systems emerged during humanity's earliest urban societies. Yet, the inscriptions remain controversial. The surviving examples are limited, fragmentary, and difficult to interpret. While some specialists view them as genuine evidence of an early local script, others argue that the available material remains insufficient to draw firm conclusions. Without longer texts or bilingual inscriptions, decipherment has proven impossible. This uncertainty reflects a broader question surrounding Konar Sandal itself. Exactly what kind of civilization flourished here? One influential proposal identifies the site with the ancient kingdom of Marhashi, mentioned in Mesopotamian texts as a wealthy eastern land known for valuable resources and occasional military conflict. Ancient rulers recorded campaigns against Marhashi and described diplomatic exchanges with its leaders. Because the geographical descriptions roughly correspond to southeastern Iran, some archaeologists consider Konar Sandal a plausible candidate. Others remain more cautious. Ancient place names often shifted over time, and surviving written records rarely provide enough geographical precision to identify archaeological sites with certainty. While Konar Sandal certainly belonged to an important regional culture, whether it represents Marhashi, another known kingdom, or an entirely separate political entity remains unresolved. Perhaps the most ambitious interpretation came from archaeologist Yusuf Majidzadeh, who proposed that the Halil River civilization may have rivaled Mesopotamia itself as one of the world's earliest centers of urban development. According to this view, southeastern Iran was not merely influenced by neighboring civilizations, but developed many aspects of complex society independently. The proposal attracted considerable international attention. Supporters pointed to the impressive architecture, artistic sophistication, long-distance trade, and possible writing system as evidence of an advanced regional civilization deserving far greater recognition. Critics, however, urged restraint. They argued that many conclusions were announced before sufficient excavation had taken place, and emphasized the importance of careful comparison with surrounding archaeological sites. Extraordinary historical claims, they noted, require extensive supporting evidence gathered over many years. Even today, that discussion continues. One reason for the uncertainty lies in the tragic circumstances surrounding the site's discovery. Because extensive looting occurred before systematic excavation, countless artifacts lost the archaeological context that would have revealed where they were deposited, how they related to nearby structures, and what activities surrounded them. In archaeology, context often provides information as valuable as the artifact itself. Once disturbed, those relationships can never be fully reconstructed. Beyond the debates over political identity and writing, Konar Sandal also raises broader questions about the development of civilization. Why do some ancient societies dominate historical memory, while others remain almost invisible? For centuries, Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley occupied the center of discussions concerning early urban life. Discoveries at Konar Sandal remind us that large portions of the ancient world remain only partially explored. Entire regional traditions may still lie beneath landscapes that have yet to receive sustained archaeological attention. Naturally, this has encouraged more speculative interpretations. Some independent researchers suggest Konar Sandal represents the remains of a forgotten civilization, whose achievements were later absorbed into neighboring cultures. Others point to similarities between artistic motifs found here and those appearing across distant regions, proposing extensive cultural interaction far earlier than traditionally assumed. Such ideas remain intriguing but difficult to confirm. Trade certainly connected Bronze Age societies across remarkable distances, allowing materials and artistic influences to spread widely. Whether these similarities reflect direct political relationships, shared religious concepts, or simply the movement of skilled artisans remains an open field of research. Modern excavation continues to transform understanding of the site. Advances in satellite imaging, environmental reconstruction, radiocarbon dating, and artifact analysis gradually reveal a more detailed picture of life along the Halil River. Each excavation season uncovers new buildings, workshops, and objects that enrich the historical record while simultaneously exposing fresh uncertainties. Standing atop the great mounds today, it is difficult to appreciate the bustling city that once occupied this landscape. Streets have disappeared. Mud brick walls have collapsed into low hills. The voices of merchants, craftsmen, and administrators faded thousands of years ago. Yet, beneath those silent mounds rests evidence of a society whose full place in human history has not yet been completely understood. Whether Konar Sandal ultimately proves to be the capital of a known kingdom, the center of an overlooked civilization, or something even more unexpected, its greatest contribution may still lie buried, waiting patiently beneath the desert soil for future discoveries to bring another forgotten chapter of the ancient world back into view. And while discoveries like Konar Sandal remind us that entire civilizations can remain overlooked for millennia, there are other ancient cities whose remarkable achievements are well established, yet whose deepest mysteries remain just as compelling. Some places reveal their engineering with astonishing clarity, while concealing the ideas that guided it. They present historians with a paradox. The more we uncover about how they were built, the more elusive their purpose and identity can become. Few archaeological sites embody that paradox more completely than Dholavira. On Qadir Island, surrounded by the vast white salt flats of the Great Rann of Kutch in western India, the ruins of Dholavira rise quietly from an unforgiving landscape. During the dry season, the horizon shimmers beneath intense sunlight, while cracked earth stretches outward toward distant mirages. For much of the year, the environment appears almost inhospitable. Yet, more than 4,000 years ago, this isolated island supported one of the greatest urban centers of the Indus Valley civilization. From above, the city still reveals the precision of its original design. Massive stone walls outline carefully planned districts. Broad streets divide neighborhoods with remarkable order. Vast reservoirs occupy strategic positions throughout the settlement, while gateways, defensive structures, ceremonial spaces, and residential quarters fit together according to a sophisticated urban plan. Unlike many ancient cities that grew gradually over centuries with little apparent organization, Dholavira seems to reflect deliberate planning from its earliest stages. The city flourished between approximately 3000 and 1500 BC, reaching its greatest prosperity during the mature phase of the Indus Valley civilization. At its height, Dholavira ranked among the largest settlements of its time, alongside cities such as Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa. Together, these urban centers formed part of one of the world's earliest civilizations, extending across an immense region of South Asia. Yet, despite decades of archaeological research, the people who built Dholavira remain strangely anonymous. Their language has never been deciphered. Their political organization remains uncertain. Their beliefs survive only through fragments of material culture and architectural clues. Unlike ancient Mesopotamia or Egypt, where long inscriptions preserve royal histories and religious traditions, the Indus civilization left behind only brief sequences of symbols. Hundreds of seals, tablets, pottery fragments, and inscriptions bear these distinctive signs, but no bilingual text has ever been discovered to unlock their meaning. Every symbol remains silent. This silence gives Dholavira an unusual quality. The city speaks constantly through its architecture while refusing to explain itself. Perhaps nowhere is this more evident than in its extraordinary water management system. Rainfall in the Rann of Kutch has always been unpredictable. Rivers flow seasonally, and prolonged droughts are common. Rather than accepting these limitations, the builders of Dholavira transformed water into the organizing principle of the entire city. Enormous reservoirs were carved directly into bedrock. Stone-lined channels directed rainwater into carefully engineered storage basins. Dams and diversion systems captured seasonal streams before precious freshwater could disappear into the surrounding salt plains. Some reservoirs reached impressive dimensions, capable of storing enormous quantities of water throughout the year. Modern engineers continued to admire the sophistication of these hydraulic systems. Rather than relying upon a single water source, the inhabitants developed multiple interconnected methods of collection, storage, and distribution. Every aspect suggests detailed planning supported by extensive practical knowledge accumulated over generations. Yet, these achievements raise important questions. How did the city's planners acquire such advanced understanding of hydrology? Was this knowledge developed locally through centuries of observation, or shared across the wider Indus civilization through networks of skilled engineers? More intriguingly, why was so much effort devoted to water management beyond what simple survival required? Some researchers suggest that reservoirs also held ceremonial significance. Throughout many ancient cultures, water represented purification, renewal, prosperity, and cosmic order. The monumental scale of certain reservoirs has prompted speculation that public ceremonies may have taken place beside them, combining practical necessity with symbolic meaning. Direct evidence remains limited, but the possibility continues to invite careful consideration. Equally striking is Dholavira's system of urban organization. The city was divided into distinct zones separated by massive fortifications. Archaeologists often describe these as the citadel, middle town, and lower town, each enclosed within its own defensive walls. Traditional interpretations suggest that these divisions reflected social hierarchy. Elite administrators may have occupied the elevated citadel, while artisans, merchants, and laborers lived in surrounding districts. Yet, no palaces comparable to those of Mesopotamian kings have been identified, nor have archaeologists uncovered unmistakable royal tombs filled with lavish treasures. Power, if concentrated at all, seems to have expressed itself differently. This has led some scholars to propose that the Indus civilization functioned through unusually decentralized forms of governance. Perhaps authority rested with councils, merchant groups, religious leaders, or local administrators rather than powerful monarchs. The archaeological evidence neither confirms nor rejects such possibilities. It simply refuses to reveal the political system that maintained one of humanity's largest urban civilizations. One discovery has generated particularly intense discussion. Near one of the city's northern gateways, archaeologists uncovered what appears to be a large signboard. The inscription originally consisted of 10 enormous symbols crafted from white gypsum and mounted above an entrance where they could be seen from considerable distance. No comparable inscription of this scale has been found elsewhere within the Indus civilization. Its purpose remains unknown. Was it the city's name, a religious declaration, an administrative title, a ceremonial message welcoming visitors? Until the script itself can be deciphered, the meaning remains inaccessible. Those 10 symbols have become one of archaeology's most powerful reminders of how close understanding can seem while remaining entirely beyond reach. Generations of linguists have attempted to decipher the Indus script. Some argue it represents a fully developed writing system encoding spoken language. Others suggest it functioned more like a symbolic administrative notation rather than true writing. Statistical analyses have revealed structured patterns within the inscriptions, implying deliberate organization rather than random decoration. Yet, no interpretation has achieved broad, scholarly acceptance. Without longer texts or bilingual examples comparable to the Rosetta Stone, the language of Dholavira continues to resist every attempt at translation. The city's trade connections reveal another remarkable dimension. Artifacts recovered during excavation include beads fashioned from carnelian, shell ornaments, copper tools, ceramics, and evidence of long-distance commerce extending across vast regions. Mesopotamian records mention commercial interactions with a distant land called Meluha, widely believed by many scholars to refer to the Indus civilization. Ships likely carried goods along coastal routes linking western India with ports throughout the Arabian Sea and the Persian Gulf. Merchants traveling these routes transported not only materials but also technologies, artistic traditions, and cultural influences. Dholavira therefore occupied a strategic position within one of the ancient world's largest commercial networks. Yet, despite this prosperity, something changed. Beginning around 2000 BC, many settlements throughout the Indus civilization entered periods of gradual decline. Dholavira was no exception. Population decreased. Construction slowed. Neighborhoods were abandoned. Eventually, the once thriving city fell silent. Why? Climate change offers one of the strongest explanations. Geological evidence suggests that shifting river systems, prolonged droughts, and weakening monsoon patterns dramatically affected water availability across the region. Communities dependent upon stable environmental conditions faced increasing challenges as freshwater sources became less reliable. Dholavira's extraordinary reservoirs may themselves reflect repeated efforts to adapt to growing environmental stress. Other researchers emphasize economic factors. Long-distance trade networks appear to have weakened during the same period. As commercial connections declined, urban centers dependent upon exchange may have struggled to sustain their populations and administrative institutions. Still others point toward combinations of environmental, economic, and social pressures unfolding gradually over generations, rather than through sudden catastrophe. Unlike many ancient cities destroyed by warfare or natural disaster, Dholavira appears to have experienced a slow transformation. Its people adapted repeatedly before eventually leaving. This gradual departure only deepens the mystery. Where did they go? Did communities migrate eastward toward regions receiving more reliable rainfall? Did they integrate into emerging cultures whose traditions later shaped the historical civilizations of South Asia? Or did their descendants continue living nearby while abandoning urban life altogether? The archaeological record provides tantalizing clues, but no definitive narrative. Naturally, Dholavira has also inspired more speculative interpretations. Some independent researchers argue that the city's sophisticated engineering indicates scientific knowledge far ahead of its time. Others suggest that its carefully proportioned layout reflects astronomical principles embedded within urban planning. Measurements of streets, gateways, and architectural proportions have revealed recurring numerical relationships that some scholars interpret as evidence of standardized planning systems. Whether these proportions carried symbolic meaning, practical engineering value, or both remains an active area of research. A few writers have even proposed connections between Dholavira and legendary civilizations described in later traditions. These ideas remain highly speculative and lack direct archaeological support. Nevertheless, they illustrate the powerful fascination exerted by a city whose accomplishments appear remarkably advanced despite the absence of written historical explanation. Perhaps the greatest mystery of Dholavira is not any single artifact or unanswered question, but the contrast between what survives and what has disappeared. The reservoirs still collect rainwater. The stone walls still define ancient streets. Gateways still stand where generations once entered the city. Yet the voices of its builders are absent. No king announces his victories. No priest records sacred ceremonies. No merchant describes distant voyages. Every physical achievement remains visible, while the human stories behind them have almost entirely dissolved into silence. Modern archaeological research continues to reveal new details through satellite imaging, environmental reconstruction, isotope analysis, and increasingly sophisticated excavation techniques. Every season adds another piece to the puzzle. Every new discovery sharpens the image of daily life, while expanding the number of unanswered questions. Standing among the weathered stones of Dholavira today, surrounded by reservoirs that once sustained an extraordinary urban community, one cannot escape a profound sense of unfinished history. The city demonstrates beyond doubt that its builders possessed remarkable intelligence, organizational skill, and environmental understanding. Yet their language remains unread, their government uncertain, their beliefs only partially visible, and the reasons for their eventual disappearance still debated. It is a place where certainty and mystery exist side by side, reminding us that even humanity's greatest achievements can endure long after the names, voices, and intentions of those who created them have faded beyond memory, perhaps waiting for a single future discovery to allow the city to speak once more. And just as cities like Dholavira can preserve the outlines of entire civilizations while withholding their voices, individual discoveries can present an equally compelling silence. Sometimes a single object, or in this case thousands of them, emerges from the earth with extraordinary clarity, yet leaves behind questions that no inscription or historical record can fully answer. Such is the story of the Frome Hoard, a discovery that transformed an ordinary field in southwest England into one of Roman Britain's greatest archaeological mysteries. The countryside surrounding the town of Frome, in Somerset, England, is a landscape of rolling hills, hedgerows, and quiet farmland. Narrow country lanes weave between green pastures, while scattered woodlands conceal traces of human activity stretching back thousands of years. At first glance, there is little to suggest that beneath one of these fields lay an untouched deposit from the final centuries of Roman Britain, a carefully arranged collection of coins that had remained hidden for more than 1,600 years. The discovery came in April 2010, when amateur metal detectorist Dave Crisp received permission to search a cultivated field. After detecting a faint signal, he began carefully removing the soil. Almost immediately, Roman coins began appearing one after another. Recognizing that the discovery might be far more significant than an ordinary find, he stopped excavating and contacted archaeologists. What followed became one of the most remarkable coin discoveries ever recorded in Britain. Professional excavation revealed a large ceramic vessel buried in a carefully dug pit. Inside were not dozens or even hundreds of coins, but more than 52,000 Roman coins packed tightly together. The pot had been placed upright, and instead of being sealed with a lid, It had apparently been filled until the coins formed a dome, rising above its rim before the entire deposit was covered with soil. The sheer scale of the hoard immediately attracted worldwide attention. Its weight exceeded 160 kilograms. Individual coins represented several generations of Roman emperors, but the overwhelming majority dated to the turbulent 3rd century AD, particularly during the reign of Carausius and the decades surrounding his rule. At first glance, the explanation might seem straightforward. Throughout history, people have buried wealth during periods of political uncertainty, intending to recover it once danger had passed. Wars, invasions, civil unrest, and economic instability have inspired countless hidden hoards across Europe. Yet, the Frome Hoard differs from many of those discoveries in important ways. The coins were not scattered carelessly into the ground. They were deliberately arranged. Evidence suggests they were deposited in organized layers, almost as though the act of burial itself followed a carefully considered sequence. Archaeologists observed that the vessel had been lowered gently into its pit without obvious signs of haste or panic. This immediately raises an important question. If someone intended to recover such immense wealth later, why bury it with such deliberate care? And why was it never retrieved? The historical context provides part of the answer. The 3rd century AD proved one of the most unstable periods in Roman history. Historians often refer to it as the crisis of the 3rd century, a time marked by civil wars, rapid changes of emperors, foreign invasions, economic disruption, and regional breakaway states. Britain itself occupied a particularly uncertain position. For several years, the province became part of an independent political entity known as the British Empire, under the leadership of Carausius, a naval commander who declared himself emperor in AD 286. Rather than immediately being defeated by Rome, Carausius established a functioning government, issued his own coinage, and controlled Britain along with parts of northern Gaul. Many coins within the Frome Hoard bear his image. Others depict later rulers who governed during the continuing political instability that followed his assassination. The collection, therefore, spans one of the most uncertain chapters of Roman Britain. To many archaeologists, this timing appears significant. Perhaps an individual, family, merchant, military officer, or local administrator concealed accumulated savings while political authority remained uncertain. If its owner later died unexpectedly or was displaced by conflict, the buried fortune could have remained undisturbed indefinitely. Such explanations account for many ancient hoards. Yet, several features of the Frome discovery remain difficult to reconcile with a simple emergency burial. One striking detail concerns the composition of the collection itself. Many of the coins possessed relatively little intrinsic value. By the late 3rd century, inflation had substantially reduced the purchasing power of much Roman currency. Rather than representing an immense fortune in precious metal, the hoard consisted largely of low-denomination bronze alloy coins containing only small amounts of silver. If someone intended to preserve wealth, why accumulate such enormous quantities of comparatively modest coinage? Some scholars suggest that the collection represented long-term savings assembled gradually over many years. Others propose that it may have served an institutional rather than personal function. Could it have belonged to a military unit, a tax office, a merchant organization, or perhaps a religious community responsible for receiving offerings? The careful arrangement inside the vessel has encouraged another interpretation. Unlike many buried hoards hastily concealed beneath floors or within walls, the Frome Hoard appears almost ceremonial. The vessel itself remained upright. The coins were stacked rather than simply poured. The burial pit showed no obvious attempt at elaborate concealment beyond ordinary covering with soil. Some archaeologists have therefore considered whether the deposit might represent a ritual offering rather than hidden savings. Across Roman Britain, valuable objects were sometimes placed into rivers, springs, pits, and sacred locations as acts of religious devotion. Weapons, jewelry, coins, and other possessions occasionally entered the ground, not because their owners intended to recover them, but because they deliberately surrendered them to divine powers. If the Frome Hoard belonged to this tradition, its purpose changes dramatically. Instead of asking why nobody returned to retrieve the coins, the better question becomes whether anyone ever intended to retrieve them at all. Unfortunately, the surrounding archaeological evidence remains inconclusive. No unmistakable temple stood directly above the deposit. No dedicatory inscriptions accompanied the coins. The burial site offers hints rather than certainty. Another fascinating aspect lies in the coins themselves. Roman currency functioned not merely as money, but also as political communication. Every coin carried portraits of emperors alongside carefully chosen inscriptions and symbolic imagery. Together, they formed miniature declarations of legitimacy distributed throughout the empire. The Frome Hoard therefore preserves thousands of official messages issued during one of Rome's most politically fragmented periods. Faces of rival rulers appear side by side. Legitimate emperors, usurpers, regional leaders, and short-lived claimants all survive together within the same vessel. The collection captures an era when authority itself had become uncertain. Some historians have suggested that studying the hoard provides insight into how ordinary communities responded to rapid political change. Did people continue accepting the coinage of newly proclaimed emperors without hesitation? Did older coins remain in circulation alongside newer issues? The mixture preserved within the hoard suggests an economy far more flexible than written historical sources sometimes imply. There is another intriguing possibility. Perhaps the coins were never gathered by one individual at all. Could multiple generations have contributed to the collection over decades? Was the vessel periodically reopened as new coins entered circulation before finally being sealed beneath the earth? The careful layering observed during excavation does not rule out such gradual accumulation. If true, the hoard becomes not a single historical event, but a long-term process reflecting changing circumstances across several generations. Naturally, discoveries of this scale invite broader speculation. Some independent researchers have proposed that the hoard reflects secret political movements operating within Roman Britain during periods of rebellion. Others suggest connections with hidden military treasuries or unofficial economic systems functioning outside imperial administration. While such theories remain largely unsupported by direct archaeological evidence, they reflect the unusual character of the discovery itself. The sheer number of coins encourages questions extending beyond ordinary explanations. More grounded interpretations continue to focus on local conditions. Roman Britain during the late 3rd century experienced repeated military campaigns, shifting loyalties, economic uncertainty, and administrative change. Communities living far from major urban centers may have responded by developing their own methods of safeguarding resources, whether temporarily or permanently. Even so, one question continues to resist every explanation. Why this particular location? The field where the hoard rested shows no obvious indication that it served as a major settlement, fortress, or administrative center. Although archaeological remains exist throughout the surrounding region, nothing immediately explains why more than 52,000 coins came to rest precisely there. Perhaps nearby structures have disappeared beneath centuries of agriculture. Perhaps later erosion removed vital evidence. Or perhaps the significance of the location belonged to beliefs that leave little trace within the archaeological record. Modern conservation transformed the discovery into an extraordinary research opportunity. Every coin was individually examined, catalogued, cleaned, and studied. Minute variations in wear, metal composition, minting techniques, and inscriptions continue to provide valuable information about Roman administration, trade, and monetary policy during one of the empire's most volatile centuries. Yet, despite all this scientific analysis, the central mystery remains remarkably intact. Who assembled this immense collection? Why was it buried with such deliberate care? Was it hidden in fear, offered in faith, preserved for future generations, or entrusted to the earth for reasons now impossible to reconstruct? Standing before the thousands of coins today, one is struck not merely by their number, but by their silence. Every portrait once represented an emperor claiming authority over a vast empire. Every inscription announced confidence, stability, and permanence. Yet, all those political ambitions ultimately found themselves resting together in darkness beneath an English field, untouched for more than 16 centuries. Whether the Frome Hoard represents forgotten wealth, sacred devotion, or an entirely different purpose still beyond our understanding, it reminds us that even the most carefully preserved discoveries rarely answer every question. Instead, they invite us to look closer, to reconsider familiar narratives, and to wonder how many other stories remain concealed beneath landscapes that appear, at first glance, perfectly ordinary. And while the Frome Hoard reminds us that countless treasures can disappear beneath familiar landscapes, there are places where the greatest discovery is not a single object, but the unmistakable footprint of people who reached farther than anyone once believed possible. Sometimes an archaeological site confirms a story long dismissed as legend. Yet, even after its authenticity is established, it leaves behind a new set of questions. Questions about ambition, exploration, survival, and the limits of what history can truly reveal. Few sites illustrate that transformation more powerfully than Leanne's Meadows. At the northernmost tip of Newfoundland, where the Atlantic Ocean meets the Strait of Belle Isle, the coastline is shaped by relentless wind, rocky shores, and open grasslands stretching toward cold northern waters. Fog drifts across the landscape without warning, softening the horizon until sea and sky become almost indistinguishable. Winters are long and unforgiving, while even summer carries a cool, maritime edge. It is a place that feels remote even today, and standing there it is difficult to imagine that more than 1,000 years ago, seafaring explorers from across the North Atlantic established a settlement on this very shore. The remains appear modest at first. Low, grassy mounds cover the outlines of timber-framed buildings, once insulated with thick layers of turf. The structures blend so naturally into the landscape that they could easily be mistaken for ordinary rises in the ground. Yet, beneath those gentle contours lie the unmistakable remains of a Norse settlement dating to approximately AD 1000. For centuries, stories preserved in medieval Icelandic sagas described voyages westward beyond Greenland into lands they called Helluland, Markland, and Vinland. According to these narratives, Norse sailors led by explorers such as Leif Erikson crossed unknown seas and established temporary settlements far beyond the boundaries of the medieval European world. For generations, many historians regarded these accounts with caution. The sagas had been written centuries after the events they described, blending historical memory with literary tradition. Without physical evidence, separating fact from storytelling proved nearly impossible. Everything changed during the 20th century. In the early 1960s, Norwegian explorer Helge Ingstad and archaeologist Anne Steen Ingstad conducted excavations at Lanso Meadows after local residents pointed them toward unusual grassy ruins. Their investigation uncovered unmistakable evidence of Norse occupation. Iron nails produced through Scandinavian smithing techniques, a forge for processing bog iron, spindle whorls used in textile production, rivets from wooden ships, and distinctive building styles all confirmed that Viking explorers had reached North America centuries before Christopher Columbus. The discovery fundamentally reshaped historical understanding. For the first time, archaeology demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt that Europeans had crossed the Atlantic nearly 5 centuries earlier than traditionally recognized. Yet, proving that the settlement existed only opened far more difficult questions. Why was it built? How long did it remain occupied? And perhaps most importantly, why was it abandoned? The settlement itself appears surprisingly small. Archaeologists have identified the remains of 8 principal buildings, including large halls, workshops, and living quarters. Estimates suggest that perhaps 70 to 100 people occupied the site during its peak. Unlike later colonial settlements established by European powers, Meadows does not appear to have developed into a permanent town. Instead, many researchers interpret it as a seasonal base. From here, Norse crews may have repaired ships, gathered resources, explored surrounding coastlines, and organized expeditions farther south. The nearby forests would have provided valuable timber unavailable in Greenland, while rivers and coastal waters offered abundant fish and marine resources. This practical explanation fits much of the archaeological evidence. Yet certain discoveries suggest a more complex story. One particularly significant artifact is a spindle whorl, a small stone tool associated with spinning wool into thread. Textile production within Norse society was overwhelmingly the responsibility of women. Its presence raises an intriguing possibility. Were women present within the settlement? If so, this was not merely an exploratory outpost occupied by sailors and warriors. Families, or at least mixed groups including both men and women, may have participated in these transatlantic voyages. Such evidence transforms the character of the settlement. Rather than representing a brief military expedition, Meadows may reflect a genuine attempt to establish a functioning community, however temporary that effort ultimately proved to be. Another remarkable discovery emerged through scientific analysis conducted centuries later. Researchers examining preserved wood from the site identified evidence consistent with a precisely dated solar event recorded in tree rings. Combined with traces of metal tool marks, this analysis suggests that Norse activity occurred in AD 1021, providing the earliest known calendar date for European presence in the Americas, based on archaeological evidence rather than historical documents. Even so, many aspects remain uncertain. The settlement's relationship to Vinland continues to provoke discussion. The Icelandic sagas describe Vinland as a land where wild grapes grew naturally, a description difficult to reconcile with Newfoundland's climate. Some scholars therefore argue that Meadows served only as a northern gateway, while expeditions traveled farther south into regions where grapes, butternuts, and milder conditions existed. Support for this idea comes from another intriguing discovery. Fragments of butternut wood recovered at the site originated from trees that do not naturally grow anywhere near Newfoundland. Their nearest natural range lies hundreds of kilometers farther south. How did these materials reach the settlement? The simplest explanation is that Norse explorers journeyed well beyond Newfoundland, collecting resources before returning north. If correct, Meadows represents only one chapter within a much larger story of exploration. Exactly how extensive those journeys became remains unknown. The sagas also describe encounters with indigenous peoples, whom the Norse called skraelings. Archaeology confirms that indigenous communities inhabited surrounding regions long before Norse arrival. However, physical evidence directly documenting interactions between these groups remains limited. Were exchanges peaceful? Did trade occur? Were relationships shaped by cooperation, misunderstanding, or conflict? The written sagas describe several encounters, some friendly and others violent. Yet, because those texts reflect Norse perspectives written centuries later, historians approach them with understandable caution. The archaeological record remains frustratingly quiet. No battlefield has been identified. No written accounts survive from indigenous communities describing these meetings. The first documented encounters between Europeans and the peoples of North America therefore remain only partially visible through material evidence. This silence encourages careful reflection. How many stories disappeared because they were never written down? What experiences unfolded beyond the settlement itself, leaving no lasting archaeological trace? Another enduring mystery concerns the settlement's relatively brief occupation. Most archaeologists believe L'Anse aux Meadows remained active for only a limited period, perhaps a decade or even less. Why would experienced sailors capable of crossing the Atlantic abandon such an achievement? Several explanations appear plausible. Maintaining regular voyages between Scandinavia, Greenland, and Newfoundland required extraordinary logistical effort. Supplies, repairs, navigation, and communication across thousands of kilometers presented enormous challenges even under favorable conditions. Conflict with indigenous populations may also have discouraged permanent settlement, as suggested by portions of the Vinland sagas. Environmental factors likely played a role as well. The northern climate shortened growing seasons and limited agricultural opportunities. Although timber and natural resources proved attractive, establishing a self-sustaining colony so far from existing Norse settlements demanded resources that Greenland's relatively small population may have struggled to provide. Rather than representing failure, abandonment may simply have reflected practical calculation. The costs outweighed the benefits. Even so, not every question yields such straightforward answers. Some researchers wonder whether additional Norse settlements remain undiscovered elsewhere along North America's eastern coastline. If L'Anse aux Meadows functioned primarily as a staging point, logic suggests that other camps, temporary harbors, or resource collection sites may once have existed farther south. Coastal erosion, rising sea levels, dense forests, and centuries of natural change could easily conceal or destroy relatively small settlements. Recent archaeological investigations continue searching for new evidence using satellite imagery, environmental sampling, and remote sensing technologies. Thus far, L'Anse aux Meadows remains unique. More speculative interpretations naturally extend even further. Some writers have proposed that Norse influence spread much deeper into North America than currently documented. Others point to disputed artifacts and controversial inscriptions found elsewhere on the continent, suggesting wider exploration than mainstream archaeology presently accepts. Most of these claims remain unverified or lack convincing archaeological context. Professional researchers generally emphasize that extraordinary historical conclusions require equally extraordinary evidence. Nevertheless, the confirmed existence of L'Anse aux Meadows serves as a valuable reminder that ideas once considered improbable can eventually be supported by careful excavation. The site also invites broader reflection on the nature of exploration itself. The Norse who crossed the Atlantic possessed no accurate maps of the Western Ocean. They navigated using practical seamanship, accumulated experience, changing weather, stars, currents, and remarkable confidence in their ships. Their voyages demonstrate that medieval exploration was far more ambitious than many earlier histories acknowledged. Yet, despite this extraordinary achievement, their presence in North America left surprisingly little permanent impact. No lasting Norse kingdom emerged. No enduring colonial network developed. The settlement faded, its buildings slowly collapsing beneath layers of grass and soil until local memory itself disappeared. For nearly 1,000 years, the Atlantic winds alone passed over the abandoned structures. Standing today among the reconstructed buildings of L'Anse aux Meadows, overlooking the same cold waters once crossed by Viking ships, it becomes clear that this place represents both certainty and mystery in equal measure. Archaeology has confirmed that Norse explorers reached these shores, forged iron, repaired vessels, built homes, and looked westward into lands unknown to medieval Europe. Yet their full story remains unfinished. How far did they travel? How many expeditions followed? What conversations took place between strangers meeting for the first time on opposite sides of the Atlantic? And how many traces of those encounters still lie concealed beneath forests, coastlines, and shifting soil, waiting for another discovery to expand a story that history has only just begun to recover? And while places like Meadows reveal journeys that can be traced through buildings, tools, and written tradition, other landmarks offer almost no historical context at all. They stand in silence, marked only by symbols carved into stone, inviting every generation to search for meanings that their creators never recorded. Some of these carvings have survived for centuries. Others may have endured for thousands of years. Among the most compelling is a remarkable boulder resting quietly in the mountains of western North Carolina, a place known simply as the Judaculla Rock. Nestled in a wooded valley near the Blue Ridge Mountains, the Judaculla Rock lies beside a small stream where the sounds of flowing water mingle with birdsong and rustling leaves. Surrounded by dense forest and gentle hills, the setting feels isolated, almost protected from the rapid pace of the modern world. Moss clings to nearby stones while changing sunlight filters through the trees, illuminating the rock's weathered surface for only brief moments each day. At first glance, the boulder appears unremarkable. It measures only a few meters across and rises modestly above the surrounding ground. Yet, approaching its surface reveals something extraordinary. Hundreds upon hundreds of carved markings cover the stone. Circles, cup-shaped depressions, winding lines, grooves, cross-like forms, geometric shapes, and abstract figures spread across nearly every available surface. The carvings overlap one another in places, forming an intricate composition unlike any written language familiar today. Together, they create one of the largest concentrations of prehistoric petroglyphs in the southeastern United States. No inscription explains who carved them. No accompanying monument identifies their purpose. The rock simply waits, covered with symbols that continue to resist complete interpretation. For the eastern band of Cherokee Indians, however, the stone has never been an anonymous archaeological object. It is deeply connected to traditional stories surrounding a powerful supernatural being known as Tzul'kalu', whose name was gradually transformed by European settlers into Judaculla. In Cherokee oral tradition, Tzul'kalu' is often described as a giant hunter possessing immense strength and wisdom, a guardian associated with mountains, wilderness, and the animals living within them. According to one enduring tradition, the markings on the rock were left by the giant himself. Some stories describe the carvings as the imprint of his great hand. Others suggest they record his presence within the landscape or commemorate events linked to his journeys through the mountains. Nearby features, including ancient trails and mountain peaks, are also woven into these traditional accounts, creating a cultural landscape where geography and storytelling become inseparable. From an archaeological perspective, the explanations are necessarily different. Researchers generally agree that the carvings were created by indigenous peoples over an extended period, possibly beginning around 1000 BC and continuing into the late prehistoric period. Precise dating remains difficult because petroglyphs carved into exposed stone rarely contain organic material suitable for radiocarbon analysis. Instead, archaeologists rely upon comparisons with nearby archaeological sites, weathering patterns, and regional artistic traditions. Even so, considerable uncertainty remains. Were all of the carvings produced during a single era? Or did generations of artists gradually add new symbols over centuries, transforming the rock into an evolving record of cultural memory? The overlapping designs suggest prolonged use rather than a single episode of carving. Some motifs appear deeply weathered, while others seem comparatively fresh, hinting that the site remained important across long stretches of time. The sheer variety of symbols presents another challenge. Unlike recognizable pictorial scenes depicting animals or human figures, many carvings at Judaculla Rock are highly abstract. Circular depressions connect through winding grooves. Clusters of dots appear beside carefully carved lines. Certain patterns repeat, while others seem unique. Do these designs represent maps, ceremonial symbols, clan identities, astronomical observations, narrative traditions? Without written explanations, every interpretation remains provisional. One influential archaeological theory suggests that the rock functioned as an important ceremonial gathering place. The surrounding region contains evidence of prehistoric settlements, seasonal travel routes, and resource gathering. Positioned near natural pathways through the mountains, the site may have served as a location where communities met for trade, diplomacy, storytelling, or ritual observances. If this interpretation is correct, the carvings may represent generations of participation, with each addition reinforcing shared cultural memory. Others propose that the symbols marked territorial boundaries or significant travel corridors. Long before modern roads crossed the Appalachian Mountains, indigenous peoples maintained extensive networks of footpaths linking distant communities. Certain recurring motifs might have communicated practical information understandable to travelers familiar with the cultural traditions of the region. Yet another possibility focuses on spirituality. Throughout many indigenous traditions, specific natural locations possess profound ceremonial importance. Mountains, rivers, springs, caves, and distinctive rock formations often serve as places where the physical and spiritual worlds are believed to intersect. Judaculla Rock's position within a landscape already rich in oral tradition naturally supports consideration of this perspective. Modern Cherokee knowledge keepers continue emphasizing that the rock should not be viewed merely as an archaeological puzzle. It remains part of an ongoing cultural tradition whose meanings cannot always be reduced to purely academic analysis. While archaeology seeks material explanations, oral traditions preserve forms of understanding transmitted across generations through language, ceremony, and storytelling. Rather than contradicting one another, these approaches sometimes illuminate different dimensions of the same place. The relationship between archaeology and oral history becomes especially important when examining sites like Judaculla Rock. Scientific investigation can document carving techniques, estimate chronology, and compare artistic styles across regions. Oral traditions, meanwhile, preserve cultural significance that physical evidence alone cannot easily reveal. Together, they offer complementary perspectives while leaving room for continued uncertainty. Some researchers have explored whether particular carvings correspond to astronomical events or celestial observations. Throughout North America, several prehistoric sites demonstrate clear awareness of seasonal solar movements, lunar cycles, and prominent stars. Certain arrangements of cup-shaped depressions and connecting grooves at Judaculla Rock have prompted speculation that they may encode observations of the heavens. At present, however, no widely accepted astronomical interpretation has emerged. The carvings simply do not provide enough consistent evidence to support definitive conclusions. Another intriguing avenue of research examines similarities between Judaculla Rock and other petroglyph sites scattered across eastern North America. While individual symbols often differ, certain recurring motifs suggest that widespread artistic conventions may have circulated among diverse indigenous cultures over long periods. Did ideas spread through trade networks stretching hundreds of miles? Were similar symbols independently developed by separate communities responding to comparable spiritual traditions? Or do these shared motifs reflect much older cultural connections now largely invisible within the archaeological record? These questions remain open. Naturally, the rock has inspired more speculative interpretations as well. Some writers have suggested that the carvings represent an unknown writing system, predating historically documented scripts in North America. Others argue that the symbols encode sophisticated mathematical knowledge or preserve maps of ancient landscapes transformed by thousands of years of environmental change. While such theories capture public imagination, professional archaeologists generally note that no convincing evidence presently supports these claims. The carvings undoubtedly carried meaning for those who created them, but identifying that meaning requires careful analysis, grounded in archaeological context rather than assumption. Even so, the absence of definitive answers continues to fascinate both scholars and visitors alike. The rock itself has survived remarkable changes. Centuries of rain, frost, flowing water, and biological growth have slowly altered its surface. Human activity has also left its mark. Earlier generations occasionally misunderstood the importance of indigenous cultural sites, leading to damage, unauthorized tracing, and even attempts to enhance certain carvings artificially. Today, preservation efforts seek to protect the petroglyphs while respecting their continuing cultural significance. Advanced technologies have transformed modern research. Three-dimensional laser scanning, digital photogrammetry, and microscopic surface analysis now allow archaeologists to document carvings with extraordinary precision. Subtle grooves, invisible under ordinary lighting, can be detected through digital modeling, revealing previously overlooked details without physically disturbing the stone. Each new survey uncovers additional complexity. Yet, complexity does not necessarily produce certainty. Instead, every newly documented symbol expands the number of possible interpretations. Standing beside Judaculla Rock today, one experiences an unusual sense of continuity. The surrounding forest has changed countless times since the earliest carvings were made. Trees have fallen and regrown. Generations have passed. Entire societies have risen and disappeared. Through all those centuries, the stone has remained where its creators left it, preserving hundreds of carefully carved marks whose full meaning remains just beyond complete understanding. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether the symbols can eventually be interpreted, but whether they were ever intended to communicate with strangers at all. They may have belonged to traditions understood perfectly by the communities who gathered here, requiring no written explanation because their meanings lived within shared memory, spoken language, and ceremony. If that is true, then the carvings remind us of a profound historical reality. Not every message from the past was created for the future. Some were meant only for those who stood before the stone at that moment in time. And yet, thousands of years later, those silent markings continue to invite careful observation, encouraging us to ask how much of humanity's oldest knowledge still survives, not in books or monuments, but in landscapes that have patiently guarded their stories across countless generations. And just as a single carved stone can preserve centuries of cultural memory, entire landscapes can become monuments in their own right. Sometimes, the greatest archaeological achievement is not hidden inside a temple or buried beneath a tomb, but spread across miles of open ground, so vast that its true design can only be appreciated from above. These places challenge not only our understanding of ancient engineering, but also the intentions of the people who shaped the land itself. Few examples are as remarkable, or as enduringly enigmatic, as the Newark Earthworks. In the gentle countryside of central Ohio, broad fields, winding rivers, and quiet woodlands conceal one of the largest and most sophisticated monumental landscapes ever created in prehistoric North America. Modern roads, neighborhoods, and parks now occupy portions of the region, yet beneath these familiar surroundings survives the outline of an immense architectural achievement. Long earthen embankments rise subtly above the landscape, forming circles, octagons, avenues, and geometric enclosures whose scale becomes fully apparent only when viewed from the air. To those standing at ground level, the earthworks appear almost deceptively simple. Grassy embankments curve gently across the terrain. Shallow ditches accompany carefully constructed walls. Time has softened their edges, while centuries of farming and urban expansion have erased many original features. Yet, what remains is still extraordinary. At its greatest extent, the Newark Earthworks covered several square miles, requiring the movement of hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of earth using nothing more than stone, bone, wooden tools, woven baskets, and remarkable human determination. The builders belong to what archaeologists identify as the Hopewell culture, a network of communities flourishing primarily between about 100 BC and AD 400. Rather than representing a single kingdom or centralized empire, the Hopewell world consisted of interconnected societies spread across much of eastern North America. These communities exchanged raw materials, artistic ideas, ceremonial traditions, and technological knowledge across astonishing distances. Copper traveled from the Great Lakes. Obsidian arrived from the Rocky Mountains. Marine shells came from the Gulf Coast. Mica reached Ohio from the Appalachian region. The Newark Earthworks emerged within this remarkable network, serving as one of its most ambitious ceremonial centers. From the beginning, archaeologists recognized that the earthworks were unlike ordinary defensive structures. Their enormous geometric precision immediately stood apart. The Great Circle, one of the site's most impressive features, measures nearly 400 meters in diameter and is enclosed by massive earthen walls rising several meters above the surrounding plain. Nearby lies the Octagon Earthworks, an equally remarkable arrangement connecting a nearly perfect octagon with a large circular enclosure through carefully aligned earthen avenues. Such complexity naturally raises an important question. Why invest so much labor constructing immense geometric forms that offered little obvious military advantage? For many years, scholars debated whether the earthworks served as villages, fortresses, marketplaces, or ceremonial gathering places. Modern archaeology increasingly supports the last of these possibilities. Excavations have revealed surprisingly little evidence for permanent residential occupation inside the principal enclosures. Instead, the distribution of artifacts suggests that large numbers of people gathered periodically for ceremonies, feasts, exchanges, and rituals before returning to surrounding communities. If true, the Newark Earthworks functioned less as a city than as a monumental meeting ground, a place where scattered communities came together under shared traditions. Yet, the exact nature of those traditions remains elusive. One of the most fascinating discoveries emerged not from excavation, but from careful measurement. During the late 20th century, researchers studying the Octagon Earthworks identified remarkable astronomical alignments incorporated into its design. The structure appears carefully oriented toward the extreme rising and setting positions of the Moon during its approximately 18.6-year cycle, known as the lunar standstill. Unlike the annual movements of the Sun, the Moon follows a much longer and more complex pattern across the horizon. Predicting these extreme positions requires sustained observation extending across nearly 2 decades. The precision demonstrated at Newark astonished many researchers. This was no accidental alignment. The geometry consistently corresponds with lunar movements visible from carefully selected observation points within the earthworks. Such findings transformed scholarly understanding of the site. Rather than viewing the monument solely as ceremonial architecture, archaeologists increasingly recognized it as a place where careful observation of the heavens formed an integral part of community life. Yet, this realization opened even deeper questions. Why was tracking the Moon so important? Did lunar cycles regulate agricultural activities? Were they linked to ceremonial calendars, leadership transitions, seasonal gatherings, or spiritual beliefs? Without written records, certainty remains impossible. The architecture itself continues to provoke admiration. Creating nearly perfect circles and octagons across uneven terrain required sophisticated surveying techniques. The builders maintained consistent proportions over enormous distances without metal instruments, modern mathematics, or written engineering manuals. How was such accuracy achieved? Experimental archaeology suggests practical methods involving ropes, wooden stakes, repeated measurements, and careful teamwork. None of these techniques require advanced technology beyond what Hopewell communities certainly possessed. Even so, the organizational skill involved remains extraordinary. Construction likely unfolded over many years. Large groups coordinated labor, gathered materials, transported soil, and maintained consistent designs generation after generation. This implies stable systems of leadership and shared purpose, even if their exact structure remains unknown. Another remarkable feature involves the sheer openness of the earthworks. Unlike fortified settlements enclosed against attack, Newark's embankments define space rather than defend it. Wide gateways invite movement rather than restrict it. Long avenues connect separate enclosures, guiding visitors through carefully organized landscapes. Some archaeologists compare the experience to ceremonial processions. Participants may have entered through designated pathways, moving gradually between different sacred spaces while taking part in rituals whose meanings have long since faded. The earthworks themselves may have shaped those experiences, directing movement, framing views of the sky, and reinforcing shared beliefs through architecture. The surrounding environment also appears significant. The complex occupies terrain near rivers and natural travel routes that linked distant Hopewell communities. Visitors arriving from many directions could reach the ceremonial center with relative ease. This accessibility supports interpretations emphasizing regional gatherings rather than isolated local use. Yet, many details remain uncertain. Exactly how often did these gatherings occur? Every season? Every year? Only during major astronomical events? The archaeological record cannot yet answer with confidence. Certain discoveries complicate the picture further. Burial mounds located elsewhere within Hopewell ceremonial landscapes contain remarkably crafted objects fashioned from exotic materials acquired through extensive trade networks. Finely carved pipes, copper ornaments, mica cutouts, obsidian blades, and elaborate jewelry reveal extraordinary artistic achievement. Curiously, many of these valuable objects were intentionally buried rather than preserved for future generations. This practice suggests that ceremonial value often outweighed practical wealth. The Newark Earthworks may have functioned within the same cultural framework, where architecture itself expressed beliefs extending beyond everyday economic concerns. Naturally, a monument of such scale has inspired more speculative interpretations. Some writers argue that the geometric precision reflects mathematical knowledge comparable to that of later civilizations. Others suggest the lunar alignments indicate sophisticated astronomical science far beyond conventional expectations. Professional archaeologists generally respond that there is no need to invoke lost technologies or forgotten civilizations. Human societies observing the night sky over many generations could certainly recognize repeating celestial cycles. Through patience, careful record-keeping preserved orally, and accumulated experience, remarkably accurate astronomical knowledge could emerge naturally. Rather than diminishing Hopewell achievements, this explanation highlights the remarkable observational skills developed by prehistoric communities. Still, one cannot ignore the broader mystery. Why devote such immense effort to monuments that left behind no written explanation? What ceremonies unfolded within the Great Circle? What songs echoed along the octagon's avenues beneath moonlit skies? How did participants understand the relationship between Earth, sky, ancestors, and community? Those questions remain largely unanswered. Modern technologies continue revealing new insights. Aerial photography first demonstrated the full scale of the earthworks during the 20th century. More recently, LiDAR scanning, satellite imagery, and geophysical surveys have identified previously unknown features concealed beneath vegetation and modern development. Each technological advance sharpens the picture while simultaneously exposing new complexities. Excavations recover fragments of pottery, stone tools, charcoal, and post holes. Environmental studies reconstruct ancient forests, wetlands, and seasonal changes. Astronomical analyses refine understanding of alignments with increasing precision. Yet, despite this growing body of evidence, the central purpose of the Newark Earthworks remains only partially understood. Perhaps that is what makes the site so compelling. Unlike monuments whose builders recorded their intentions in lengthy inscriptions, Newark asks us to interpret architecture alone. Every embankment reflects deliberate choice. Every angle, distance, and curve represents human intention. The evidence clearly demonstrates extraordinary planning, cooperation, and knowledge. What it cannot fully reveal are the thoughts, emotions, and beliefs that inspired those efforts. Standing today within the quiet, grass-covered enclosures, it is difficult to imagine the immense gatherings that once transformed this landscape into one of North America's greatest ceremonial centers. Thousands of people may have walked these pathways, watched the moon rise above carefully aligned embankments, exchanged goods from distant lands, renewed alliances, honored ancestors, and participated in traditions preserved entirely through memory rather than writing. The earth still preserves the outlines of those remarkable achievements, but their deepest meanings remain just beyond complete understanding. Perhaps future discoveries will illuminate another chapter of the Hopewell world. Or perhaps the Newark Earthworks will continue reminding us that some of humanity's greatest monuments were designed not merely to endure, but to invite every generation to look upward, look outward, and continue searching for answers hidden within both the landscape and the sky. And while monumental landscapes like the Newark Earthworks preserve the physical traces of communities that flourished for centuries, there are other places where the opposite occurred. Entire settlements once filled with farms, churches, and families slowly faded into silence, leaving behind abandoned buildings and unanswered questions. In some cases, archaeology can reconstruct how people lived with remarkable precision. Explaining why they disappeared, however, remains far more difficult. Few historical mysteries illustrate this quiet disappearance more powerfully than the lost Norse colonies of Greenland. Along Greenland's southwestern coast, narrow fjords cut deep into towering cliffs carved by ancient glaciers. During the brief Arctic summer, patches of green pasture emerge between rocky hillsides, while icy waters reflect snow-covered mountains stretching toward the horizon. The landscape is beautiful, but demanding. Long winters bring darkness, fierce winds, and frozen seas, while even the growing season lasts only a few precious months. Yet, around AD 985, this remote coastline became home to one of the most ambitious settlements of the medieval North Atlantic. According to Icelandic tradition, Eric the Red, exiled from Iceland after a violent dispute, sailed westward in search of new land. Finding fertile grazing areas along Greenland's southwestern fjords, he returned to Iceland with enthusiastic reports intended to attract settlers. His choice of the name Greenland was almost certainly deliberate. Medieval sources suggest he believed an inviting name would encourage migration, even if much of the island remained dominated by ice. The strategy succeeded. Within a few years, several hundred settlers crossed the North Atlantic, establishing what became known as the Eastern Settlement and the Western Settlement. Despite their names, both occupied Greenland's southwestern coastline, where comparatively mild conditions allowed limited farming and livestock grazing. The settlers brought with them everything needed to recreate familiar Scandinavian life. They built turf and stone farmhouses, raised cattle, sheep, and goats, constructed churches following European Christian traditions, established bishoprics, monasteries, and trading networks connecting Greenland with Iceland and Norway. Archaeological excavations reveal surprisingly prosperous communities. Stone churches still stand in partial ruin beside abandoned farmsteads. Animal bones, household tools, imported ceramics, iron objects, weaving equipment, and carved wooden artifacts testify to centuries of organized settlement. For nearly 500 years, these colonies endured. Then they disappeared. Not suddenly, not dramatically, simply gradually. By the early 15th century, written communication between Greenland and Scandinavia became increasingly rare. Ships visited less frequently. Trade declined. References within medieval documents grew sporadic until, eventually, the colonies vanished entirely from European records. When later explorers returned, the Norse settlers were gone. Their churches stood empty. Their farms lay abandoned. Their fields slowly returned to wilderness. What happened? The question has fascinated historians, archaeologists, and climatologists for generations. One of the strongest explanations involves climate. The Norse settlement coincided with a relatively mild climatic period, often called the medieval warm period. During these centuries, temperatures across parts of the North Atlantic allowed agriculture to flourish farther north than before. Beginning around the 14th century, however, conditions gradually shifted. The onset of what historians commonly call the Little Ice Age brought colder temperatures, expanding sea ice, shorter growing seasons, and increasingly unpredictable weather. Scientific studies of ice cores, lake sediments, and marine records support this general climatic transition. For Greenland's settlers, even modest environmental changes carried enormous consequences. Shorter summers reduced hay production needed to feed livestock through winter. Sea ice complicated navigation, making trade voyages longer and more dangerous. Harsher winters increased pressure on already limited resources. Yet, climate alone may not explain everything. Archaeological evidence reveals that the Norse proved remarkably adaptable. Excavations show increasing reliance on marine resources over time. Seal bones become more common in later settlements, indicating that hunting gradually supplemented traditional farming. Rather than stubbornly refusing change, the colonists adjusted their economy as conditions evolved. This flexibility complicates the simple narrative of environmental collapse. If they successfully adapted for generations, why did those adaptations eventually prove insufficient? Trade provides another important piece of the puzzle. Greenland occupied an isolated position at the edge of medieval Europe's commercial world. Imports such as iron, timber, and luxury goods depended upon regular voyages from Norway and Iceland. In return, Greenland exported valuable products, particularly walrus ivory. During the Middle Ages, walrus tusks represented an important luxury material used throughout Europe for religious carvings, decorative objects, and prestigious artworks. For centuries, this trade helped sustain the colony. Then, circumstances changed. By the 14th century, increasing supplies of elephant ivory entered European markets through expanding trade routes with Africa. As elephant ivory became more widely available, demand for walrus ivory appears to have declined. If Greenland's principal export lost economic value, maintaining long-distance trade became increasingly difficult. Without regular imports, replacing essential tools, constructing ships, and sustaining European-style farming would have become progressively more challenging. Still, archaeology suggests that economic decline unfolded gradually rather than catastrophically. Another possibility centers on changing political priorities. Norway itself experienced profound upheaval during the late Middle Ages. The Black Death devastated populations across Europe after the mid-14th century, disrupting governments, trade networks, and maritime activity. Fewer ships sailed the North Atlantic. Royal attention shifted toward more immediate concerns closer to home. Greenland's distant colonies may simply have become increasingly isolated within a changing political landscape. Isolation, however, need not mean extinction. Perhaps the settlers continued surviving independently for generations after official contact ceased. Some historians have explored this possibility, though direct evidence remains limited. Another enduring mystery involves the relationship between the Norse settlers and the indigenous Inuit communities known today as the ancestors of the Qaramel people. Archaeology confirms that the Thule culture expanded across Greenland during roughly the same period that Norse settlements entered decline. The two societies almost certainly became aware of one another. Fragments of Norse materials have been recovered from Inuit archaeological sites, while historical accounts mention encounters between Europeans and northern peoples. But what kind of relationships developed? Were they peaceful trading partners? Occasional rivals competing for resources? Did they exchange technologies, hunting techniques, or practical knowledge about Arctic survival? The surviving evidence remains frustratingly incomplete. Some scholars argue that greater cultural exchange might have improved Norse adaptation to Arctic conditions. Inuit communities possessed highly specialized knowledge of sea ice, marine hunting, clothing, transportation, and seasonal movement developed across countless generations. The Norse, meanwhile, largely maintained European agricultural traditions, despite increasingly difficult environmental conditions. Yet, archaeological discoveries suggest at least limited interaction occurred. Exactly how extensive those contacts became remains uncertain. The disappearance of the Western settlement presents one of the greatest puzzles. Unlike the Eastern settlement, which survived into the 15th century, the Western settlement seems to have been abandoned significantly earlier. A medieval Icelandic account describes arriving at deserted farms where livestock had become wild and buildings stood empty. Whether this account accurately reflects historical events or later storytelling remains debated, but it captures the haunting image that has endured for centuries. An entire community quietly disappearing without leaving clear explanation. Naturally, more speculative theories have emerged. Some writers have proposed that disease swept through the colonies long before outside records noticed their decline. Others suggest attacks by pirates or conflicts with indigenous groups. A few even imagine that surviving settlers abandoned Greenland altogether, sailing farther west into North America and merging with other communities. These ideas remain difficult to support with convincing archaeological evidence. No widespread signs of violent destruction appear across Norse settlements. No mass graves indicate epidemic catastrophe. Instead, the archaeological record suggests gradual abandonment rather than sudden disaster. Homes were often left in relatively orderly condition. Tools remained. Churches slowly collapsed from neglect rather than fire. This quiet disappearance may be the most unsettling aspect of the entire story. Modern scientific techniques continue transforming understanding of Norse Greenland. Ancient DNA, stable isotope analysis, environmental reconstruction, pollen studies, and radiocarbon dating reveal increasingly detailed information about diet, agriculture, climate, and patterns of land use. Researchers can now reconstruct changing ecosystems with remarkable precision. Every discovery enriches the historical picture, while reminding us how many questions remain. One particularly revealing line of evidence comes from isotopic analysis of human bones. Early settlers relied heavily upon domesticated livestock, consistent with traditional Scandinavian farming. Later generations consumed dramatically greater quantities of seals and marine mammals. The colonists clearly adapted their diet as environmental conditions shifted. This evidence reinforces a picture not of passive victims, but of resilient communities responding intelligently to changing circumstances. Even so, resilience had limits. Perhaps no single event ended Norse Greenland. Instead, a combination of colder climate, declining trade, political isolation, demographic pressures, and changing economic realities gradually weakened communities until maintaining permanent settlement simply became impossible. History often prefers dramatic endings. The evidence from Greenland suggests something quieter. Families leaving one by one, farms abandoned across successive generations, churches visited less frequently, voyages postponed until they no longer occurred at all. Standing today among the stone ruins overlooking Greenland's silent fjords, surrounded by the same mountains and icy waters that greeted the first settlers more than 1,000 years ago, it becomes clear why this story continues to captivate historians. The walls remain. The churches still overlook empty fields. The foundations of homes preserve the outlines of ordinary lives lived at the edge of the known medieval world. Yet, the voices of those final generations have disappeared completely, leaving behind only scattered clues preserved in stone, bone, and frozen soil. Whether the last settlers sailed away, slowly merged into other communities, or simply faded with time remains uncertain. And perhaps somewhere beneath Greenland's windswept tundra, another forgotten farmstead, or another overlooked piece of evidence, still waits to reveal how one of the medieval world's most ambitious experiments at the edge of the Arctic finally came to its quiet end. And while the abandoned farms of Norse Greenland remind us that entire communities can quietly disappear, some places leave behind a different kind of mystery. Instead of asking why people vanished, they compel us to ask why they gathered in the first place. Across thousands of years, certain landscapes seem to have drawn generations together for reasons that remain only partially understood. Among the windswept islands of northern Scotland, one remarkable archaeological site continues to reshape everything we thought we knew about the earliest monumental societies of Europe. That place is the Ness of Brodgar. Situated on a narrow strip of land between the freshwater loch of Harry and the saltwater loch of Stennis in the Orkney Islands, the Ness of Brodgar occupies one of the most striking locations in prehistoric Britain. Even today, the landscape possesses a quiet sense of grandeur. Open skies stretch endlessly above rolling fields, while standing stones rise from the earth in silent formations that have watched over these islands for millennia. Sea winds sweep constantly across the narrow peninsula, carrying the scent of salt and heather through a landscape where ancient monuments seem almost inseparable from the natural world. At first glance, the site itself appears surprisingly modest. Low stone walls emerge from carefully excavated trenches. Rectangular foundations outline buildings long reduced to their lowest courses. Visitors see archaeologists kneeling among exposed flagstones, carefully brushing away soil that has protected these remains for thousands of years. Yet beneath this quiet surface lies one of the most extraordinary Neolithic discoveries ever made in northern Europe. The Ness of Brodgar was first recognized through geophysical surveys in the early 21st century, revealing a vast complex hidden beneath farmland. Large-scale excavations soon confirmed that this was no ordinary settlement. Instead, archaeologists uncovered an extensive group of monumental stone buildings, massive enclosing walls, decorated architecture, finely crafted artifacts, and evidence of repeated ceremonial activity spanning many centuries. Construction appears to have begun around 3,300 BC and continued for roughly 1,000 years. This places the site among the great ceremonial landscapes of Neolithic Europe, contemporary with the earliest phases of Stonehenge and centuries before the construction of many later prehistoric monuments. Yet, unlike many famous stone circles, the Ness of Brodgar reveals something far more complex. Here, people did not simply erect standing stones. They built architecture on an astonishing scale. One structure in particular immediately captured archaeologists' attention. Known simply as Structure 10, the building measured approximately 25 meters in length, with walls several meters thick. Carefully dressed sandstone blocks formed impressive facades, while massive internal spaces suggest gatherings involving substantial numbers of people. The craftsmanship is remarkable. Stone slabs were selected with precision. Interior walls displayed colored pigments. Carved stone decorations appeared throughout the building. Some stones even bore intricate geometric patterns, unlike anything expected from communities often described as simple early farmers. This immediately challenges long-held assumptions. How did Neolithic societies organize the labor required for projects of such ambition? Thousands of tons of stone had to be quarried, transported, shaped, and assembled without metal tools, wheeled vehicles, or written plans. The effort required sustained cooperation extending far beyond individual households. Clearly, these communities possessed sophisticated systems of organization. Exactly how those systems functioned remains uncertain. The location itself adds another layer of intrigue. The Ness of Brodgar lies almost perfectly positioned between two other remarkable monuments. The Ring of Brodgar, one of Britain's largest stone circles, and the Standing Stones of Stennis, another ceremonial complex dating to the same broad period. Together, these monuments form an interconnected ritual landscape unlike almost anywhere else in Europe. Rather than existing independently, they appear to have been carefully integrated into a broader cultural environment. Pathways likely connected them. Sightlines linked major monuments across the landscape. Natural features such as hills, locks, and the changing movement of sunlight seem deliberately incorporated into their arrangement. Many archaeologists now believe the entire region functioned as a ceremonial center, drawing visitors from across Orkney and perhaps much farther afield. But what exactly brought people here? Excavations have uncovered enormous quantities of animal bones, especially cattle, many bearing evidence of large communal feasts. Pottery fragments, polished stone tools, carved stone balls, finely crafted mace heads, and decorated ceramics further suggest gatherings extending well beyond ordinary domestic life. Some researchers envision seasonal festivals where dispersed farming communities reunited for ceremonies, exchanges, marriages, political negotiations, and religious observances. The archaeological evidence strongly supports repeated communal activity, yet its deeper meaning remains elusive. Another remarkable feature is the quality of artistic expression. Decorated stone surfaces display carefully incised geometric motifs, intersecting lines, spirals, lozenges, and abstract patterns. Similar designs appear elsewhere across Neolithic Britain and Ireland, suggesting shared symbolic traditions extending across considerable distances. Did these motifs communicate religious ideas, clan identities, cosmological beliefs, or were they simply decorative expressions of artistic tradition? Without written language, interpretation necessarily remains cautious. Perhaps the most dramatic discovery occurred near the end of the site's active life. Evidence suggests that many buildings were intentionally dismantled rather than abandoned through gradual decay. In some cases, walls were carefully taken apart. Valuable objects were deposited deliberately. Animal remains accompanied what appear to have been highly structured closing ceremonies. Structure 10 presents an especially striking example. Before its final abandonment, Archaeologists believe the building underwent a carefully orchestrated sequence of events. Large numbers of cattle were slaughtered nearby. Selected artifacts were placed within the structure. Finally, portions of the building were deliberately demolished before being covered. This does not resemble destruction caused by warfare or natural disaster. Instead, it suggests ritual closure. Why would communities intentionally dismantle one of their greatest architectural achievements? One possibility is that buildings themselves possessed symbolic lives. Just as individuals experienced birth, maturity, and death, monumental structures may also have undergone ceremonial endings once their purpose had been fulfilled. Similar practices have been identified at several prehistoric sites, although none quite on the same scale. Still, certainty remains impossible. The site also demonstrates remarkable engineering skill. Stone drainage systems directed rainwater away from buildings. Carefully prepared clay floors provided stable surfaces. Massive stone walls insulated interiors against harsh northern weather. Some buildings contained internal divisions suggesting specialized functions rather than simple domestic occupation. Were these temples? Assembly halls? Elite residences? Workshops? Ceremonial spaces? Perhaps different structures served different purposes across changing generations. No single explanation fully accounts for every discovery. Astronomical alignments naturally enter the discussion as well. Several monuments throughout Orkney display orientations toward significant solar events, including midsummer and midwinter sunrises or sunsets. Researchers continue examining whether specific buildings at the Ness of Brodgar also incorporate celestial observations into their design. Certain alignments appear promising, others remain disputed. The available evidence encourages continued investigation without supporting sweeping conclusions. Even so, the broader ceremonial landscape undoubtedly reflects careful awareness of both geography and the sky. Naturally, discoveries of such sophistication have inspired more speculative theories. Some writers propose that the Ness of Brodgar served as the political capital of a vast Neolithic society extending across Britain. Others suggest that the site's remarkable architecture preserves knowledge inherited from far older cultures now entirely lost. A few even speculate that its builders possessed advanced surveying methods inexplicable for the period. Professional archaeologists generally emphasize that none of these ideas require extraordinary assumptions. Human communities, given sufficient time, cooperation, and accumulated experience, can achieve astonishing architectural accomplishments using relatively simple technologies. Indeed, the Ness of Brodgar demonstrates precisely that reality. Its builders accomplished extraordinary feats not because they possessed forgotten technologies, but because they possessed remarkable organizational ability, craftsmanship, and shared cultural purpose. Even so, many essential questions remain unanswered. Why did this particular peninsula become such an important ceremonial center? How far did pilgrims travel to reach it? What beliefs inspired the enormous investment of labor sustained across nearly 1,000 years? And why did activity eventually cease? Around 2300 BC, the great buildings fell out of use. Ceremonies ended. Construction stopped. The landscape gradually returned to quiet pasture, while later generations built new traditions elsewhere. Unlike cities abandoned through conflict or environmental collapse, the Ness of Brodgar seems to have experienced a deliberate and orderly conclusion. Its significance faded, but not through obvious catastrophe. Standing today among the exposed stone walls, with the ring of Brodgar visible across the surrounding fields and the northern wind sweeping between the ancient foundations, it becomes clear why this place continues to captivate archaeologists from around the world. Every excavation season reveals new architecture, new artifacts, and new evidence of lives shaped by beliefs we can only partially reconstruct. The stones speak of extraordinary planning, communal effort, artistic sophistication, and ceremonies repeated across countless generations. Yet they remain silent about the ideas that gave those achievements meaning. Perhaps somewhere beneath the unexcavated ground, another building, another carved stone, or another carefully preserved deposit still waits to reveal why this remarkable peninsula became one of prehistoric Europe's greatest ceremonial landscapes. Or perhaps the deepest purpose of the Ness of Brodgar belongs to a worldview that can now be approached only through fragments, leaving its greatest mystery resting quietly beneath the Orkney soil. And while places like the Ness of Brodgar demonstrate how Neolithic communities gathered around monumental architecture, other discoveries push the origins of such construction even further into the past. They suggest that organized building projects began long before the first cities, before metal tools, and even before agriculture had fully transformed human society. These sites force archaeologists to reconsider some of the most fundamental assumptions about the earliest chapters of civilization. Among the most intriguing is a quiet mound in northern Syria known as Tel Qaramel. North of the modern city of Aleppo, on a fertile plain watered by seasonal streams, rises an archaeological mound that appears almost indistinguishable from countless others scattered across the Near East. Wind carries fine dust across the open landscape, while cultivated fields stretch toward distant hills. From the surface, Tel Qaramel offers few clues that beneath its layers of earth lies evidence of one of humanity's oldest known permanent settlements. Like many archaeological tells, the mound grew gradually over thousands of years. Generation after generation built homes upon the remains of earlier homes. As walls collapsed and new structures replaced old ones, the settlement slowly rose above the surrounding countryside, preserving its history in successive layers of earth. When archaeologists began extensive excavations during the late 20th century, they expected to uncover another important Neolithic settlement. Instead, they encountered something altogether unexpected. Hidden within the deepest layers were the remains of several circular stone towers dating to approximately 10,700 to 9,400 BC, making them among the oldest monumental stone towers ever discovered anywhere in the world. Their age immediately attracted international attention. These structures predate pottery. They predate widespread agriculture. They even appear older than many of the famous monuments usually associated with the beginnings of monumental architecture. Suddenly, long-standing assumptions about the earliest builders of large stone structures required careful reconsideration. At least 5 towers have been identified at Tel Qaramel, though not all survived equally well. Each differs somewhat in size and construction, suggesting they were not identical copies but individual projects built over many generations. The largest rises several meters high and measures roughly 7 meters in diameter. Massive limestone blocks form thick circular walls surrounding carefully built interiors. Some towers contain stone stairways leading upward, while others include internal features whose purpose remains uncertain. The quality of construction is striking. These were not rough piles of stone assembled without planning. Builders selected suitable materials, shaped them with considerable care, and created durable structures capable of surviving thousands of years beneath accumulated soil. Who were these people? That question lies at the heart of Tel Qaramel's enduring mystery. The settlement dates to a remarkable transitional period in human history. Communities throughout the Near East were gradually shifting from highly mobile hunting and gathering toward increasingly permanent villages. Agriculture was beginning to emerge, but many groups still depended heavily upon wild plants and animals. Traditional historical models once suggested that permanent architecture followed agriculture. The reasoning appeared straightforward. Only farming could support stable populations large enough to organize substantial construction projects. Tel Qaramel complicates that narrative. Evidence suggests that organized communities capable of building impressive stone monuments existed before agriculture had fully matured. If so, perhaps social organization did not simply result from farming. Perhaps it helped create the conditions that allowed agriculture to flourish. Rather than villages emerging because people farmed, communities may have gathered first, developing shared traditions, leadership, and cooperation that later encouraged agricultural innovation. The towers themselves remain difficult to interpret. One possibility is entirely practical. Perhaps they served defensive purposes. Raised stone towers provide elevated viewpoints from which approaching animals or neighboring groups could be observed. In regions where resources fluctuated seasonally, early warning would have offered obvious advantages. Yet, several aspects challenge this interpretation. The settlement shows limited evidence of fortification comparable to later defensive sites. The towers also appear carefully integrated into community life rather than isolated military installations. Another explanation focuses on communal gathering. Large stone structures often function as focal points within settlements, bringing people together for meetings, ceremonies, decision-making, or collective labor. The towers may have served precisely this role. Their durability would have reinforced continuity across generations, becoming permanent landmarks within an evolving village. Archaeologists have also noted similarities with other early ceremonial sites throughout the region. During roughly the same broad period, communities constructed increasingly sophisticated ritual architecture across parts of the Near East. This raises an intriguing possibility. Were the towers themselves ceremonial? Perhaps they marked sacred spaces, commemorated ancestors, or symbolized shared identity within one of humanity's earliest permanent communities. Direct evidence remains limited. No inscriptions survive. No artwork explicitly explains their purpose. The stones themselves remain silent. Excavations have nevertheless revealed important clues about daily life. Stone tools, grinding implements, animal bones, plant remains, and hearths demonstrate that Qaramel supported a substantial population over long periods. Hunting continued to provide significant food resources, but evidence also suggests increasing experimentation with cultivating plants. The settlement therefore occupied a pivotal moment between two worlds. Its inhabitants still lived partly according to traditions inherited from mobile hunter-gatherers while simultaneously laying foundations for agricultural societies that would soon transform human history. One particularly fascinating aspect concerns continuity. Rather than building a single tower and abandoning it, the inhabitants appear to have constructed multiple towers across successive occupational phases. Older structures gave way to newer ones. Architectural traditions evolved. Construction techniques improved. This persistence implies that the towers held enduring importance extending far beyond any immediate practical need. What cultural values justified such repeated investment? Did every generation understand the towers in exactly the same way? Or did their meanings gradually change as society itself evolved? These questions remain impossible to answer with certainty. Another mystery involves the remarkable engineering displayed by the builders. Without metal tools, wheeled transport, or domesticated draft animals, moving large limestone blocks required coordinated labor and careful planning. Experimental archaeology demonstrates that such achievements certainly fall within the capabilities of organized prehistoric communities. Even so, coordinating dozens, perhaps hundreds of individuals toward a common architectural goal reflects impressive social cohesion. Someone planned these projects. Someone organized labor. Someone transmitted construction knowledge across generations. Exactly how authority functioned within Qaramel remains unknown. Some archaeologists envision respected elders guiding communal decisions. Others suggest leadership based upon ritual knowledge rather than political power. Still others propose flexible systems where cooperation emerged through shared tradition instead of centralized control. The archaeological evidence supports none of these possibilities conclusively. Instead, it hints at complex social relationships whose details remain beyond recovery. Naturally, the extraordinary age of the towers has inspired broader speculation. Some independent researchers argue that they represent the surviving remnants of an advanced culture previously unknown to history. Others suggest that such sophisticated construction appeared too early to fit conventional models of prehistoric development. Professional archaeologists generally disagree. Every excavated layer at Tel Qaramel fits within a coherent sequence showing gradual cultural development rather than sudden unexplained leaps. Stone tools, architecture, food remains, and settlement patterns all reflect communities steadily adapting over centuries. The towers appear remarkable not because they require forgotten civilizations, but because they reveal the remarkable capabilities of ordinary prehistoric people working together. Perhaps the greatest lesson of Tel Qaramel is precisely that. Human ingenuity did not suddenly emerge alongside cities or writing. Its roots reach much deeper into the prehistoric past than earlier generations often imagined. The towers also invite comparison with other early monumental sites. Across the Near East, archaeologists increasingly recognize that substantial ceremonial or communal architecture appeared surprisingly early in human history. Each new discovery expands the timeline of organized construction. Yet Tel Qaramel remains distinctive. Its towers represent a rare architectural tradition whose exact function has no universally accepted explanation. Unlike later fortresses, they lack obvious military characteristics. Unlike temples from historical civilizations, they contain no inscriptions identifying deities. Unlike ordinary dwellings, their scale exceeds domestic necessity. They occupy a category all their own. Modern scientific techniques continue refining the chronology. Radiocarbon dating, microscopic analysis of construction materials, botanical studies, and environmental reconstruction gradually reveal more about the settlement's changing landscape. Researchers examine pollen trapped within ancient sediments, reconstruct seasonal rainfall patterns, and analyze microscopic traces of plant cultivation. Each discovery enriches understanding while preserving the central mystery. Even the tower's internal stairways continue to provoke discussion. Why build elevated access within structures whose upper portions have long disappeared? Did platforms once overlook the surrounding settlement? Were ceremonies performed above the gathered community? Did watchkeepers observe distant horizons? Or did climbing the towers carry symbolic meaning now forever lost? No surviving evidence answers these questions directly. Standing today at Tel Qaramel, surrounded by the weathered foundations of towers that have endured for nearly 13,000 years, one experiences a profound shift in perspective. These stones were already ancient long before the pyramids of Egypt, Stonehenge, or the earliest cities of Mesopotamia appeared. They belong to a chapter of humanity when written language did not exist, metals had not yet transformed technology, and agriculture was only beginning to reshape daily life. Yet the builders clearly possessed imagination, cooperation, engineering skill, and a shared purpose strong enough to raise monuments that would outlast countless generations. Why they chose to build these towers, and what they truly meant to those who gathered around them, remains one of prehistory's most compelling unanswered questions. Perhaps somewhere beneath the remaining layers of Tel Qaramel, another buried structure or overlooked artifact still waits to reveal why some of humanity's earliest builders looked beyond simple survival and began shaping stone into monuments whose meaning continues to challenge us nearly 13 millennia later.